Not a violation. So you guys familiar with the sticker?
Good morning, everybody. If you'd like to go ahead, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much. Welcome to March 28th, 2024's meeting of the Federal Secure Advisory Committee, FSCAC. My name is Michelle White, and I'm the designated federal officer or DFO for this advisory committee. I would like to thank all of the presenters, attendees, and stakeholders for joining us today, including those who provide public comment. Public comments that were submitted via the FSCAC public comment form by last Wednesday, March 20th, have been provided to the committee members. Before we start, there are a few things that you should know. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded via Zoom. The advisory committee is statutorily required under the James N. Inhofe National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2023, and thus formally established under the Federal Advisory Committee Act, or FSCAC, as of our charter's official filing date of February 28, 2023. This committee is considered a federal advisory committee and is governed by the requirements under FSCAC. My role as the DFO is to manage the day-to-day administrative operations of the committee, attend all committee meetings, and ensure that the committee operates in compliance with FSCAC. The duties of this committee include providing advice and recommendation to the GSA administrator, the FedRAMP board, and agencies on technical, financial, programmatic, and operational matters regarding secure adoption of cloud computing products and services. The majority of the work of this committee are focused around the FedRAMP Authorization Act of 2022's statutory requirements and purpose. Specifically, we examine the operations of FedRAMP and determine ways that the authorization processes can be continuously improved, collect information and feedback on agency compliance with and implementation of FedRAMP, and serve as a forum that facilitates communication and collaboration among the FedRAMP stakeholder community. I will now go through a roll call for all committee members. Please let me know you're present by stating here. Ann Lewis. Here. Daniel Payne.
Here.
Michael Olivia-Circa.
Here.
John Greenstein.
Here.
Marcy Womack. Here. Bronco Boken.
Present.
Matt Schull.
Here.
Bo Burles.
Here.
Lamont Yarborough.
Here.
Nauman Asari.
Here.
Jackie Snoffer. Here. Bill Hunt.
Here.
And Joshua Cohen.
Here.
All right, thank you all. It looks like we do have a quorum established. I will now go ahead and review some background from our last meeting, the purpose, outcomes, and agenda for today's meeting, and just for everyone's awareness. After our January 18th, 2024 meeting, the committee approved their top actionable recommendations on their initial priorities of the authorization process improvements, continuous monitoring or COMMON process improvements, and automation opportunities and initiatives. The chair drafted an executive summary based on the committee's recommendations and delivered the memo to the GSA administrator on Tuesday, March 5th, 2024. This final deliverable is available on our website. So therefore, the purpose of today's meeting is for FSCAC to determine what priorities the committee would like to work on next. The committee has requested specific presentations for today to include an OMB memo update, FedRAMP's response to those updates, and more information from the 3PAO experience. By the end of this meeting, we should all leave with an understanding of what the committee's next priorities are, or additional information the committee needs in order to determine those next priorities. To support the development of our priorities, we were also briefed on, we will also be briefed on updates to the OMB draft memorandum entitled Modernization of the FedRAMP, or the Federal Risk Authorization Management Program, FedRAMP. It's a draft OMB memo, FedRAMP's priorities and roadmap in response to OMB's draft memo. The third party assessment organization or 3PO stakeholder experience. And again, we'll leave with an agreement on what FSCAC's priorities will be. So as you can see, our agenda is listed. We're doing the call to order now. We will first have our public comment, our chair remarks, and then we will have a OMB update from Juvenile Regard. And a presentation from FedRAMP on their roadmap and response to the draft memo.
Draft memo being the one that we sent.
The response to the draft, no, the OMB draft memo on FedRAMP. And then we'll have our 3PO stakeholder experience discussion at 11:45. We do have some breaks scheduled in here for just a break to break things up. And then we have our lunch break from 12:30 to 1:40 today. From 1:40 on, we will be deliberating and voting on our next priorities. And then finally, we'll have our closing remarks and close up at 3 o'clock. Few more housekeeping items for the committee members. We have a lot of presentation and discussion scheduled for today, unless otherwise requested by our speakers. Please hold your questions until the committee Q&A portion of the agenda. If you have a question during the discussion, please raise your hand and you will be called on based on the order you are in the queue. Again, please identify yourself before speaking, so those listening via the webcast or reading the minutes after the meeting will know who made which comment. And finally, if you're not a committee member, please hold all comments until the public comment period, which actually is now. So we'd like to go ahead and invite the public that is in person today to share their comments. To our speakers, please note that there is going to be a timer displayed on the screen indicating your time remaining, and the alert will indicate you were out of time. Each speaker is allotted 3 minutes to make their comments. We will be interrupting speakers that exceed 3 minutes, so please speak succinctly and please be respectful of the time. As a reminder, all public comments submitted by Wednesday, March 20th were presented to committee members prior to the meeting. And with that, please go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to provide a comment, and I will call on you to speak in the order in which your hand was raised. And once I call on you, please step to the podium to speak. Yes, sir. If you please come to the podium so that the webcast can hear and see you.
Good morning. My name is Josh Blair. I'm part of the FedRAMP team at Red Hats, and I'm here today to offer input on what Red Hat believes this committee's priorities should be for the next year. First and foremost, this committee should focus on FedRAMP's original mission, the acceleration of software procurement for the federal government. In that light, it is imperative that the intake process to an agency-agnostic authorization, i.e. JAB or whatever replaces it, is reestablished and streamlined in a way that continues to benefit CSPs looking for a way to continue to deliver software at speed. Being able to expand access to the CSP's path to authorization, as well as streamline the SCR process, is critical to that original objective. The second part of FedRAMP's original mission is effective risk management. The National Vulnerability Database increases on average over 20% every year the number of vulnerabilities reported. Currently, vendors are expected to patch low and moderate CVEs within 90 and 100 days respectively. According to Stanford University, 88% of data breaches are human error, leaving the remaining 12% to technical experts, which is what vulnerability remediation and patching addresses. Risk management is really about effective resource utilization. Right now, CSPs are expected to expand finite engineering resources to fix these vulnerabilities, particularly where we already know the risk is low, as opposed to just fixing the known known exploit vulnerabilities, instead of innovating and delivering new products to the federal government. And we ask that this committee look to identify better ways to manage risk. Let's focus more on that 88% of breaches rather than the 12%, while ensuring that the engineering hours are maximized within that 12%, as part of a risk-based approach to vulnerability management. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Do we have any other public speakers? This will go ahead and conclude our public comment for today. Thank you all. We will now go ahead and jump directly into our agenda's first topic today, which is our chair remarks. And as the committee chair, I would like to invite you to make any remarks you'd like to make at this time.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Lewis, FSCAC Chair. As Michelle previously mentioned, we approved our top actionable recommendations and our initial priorities of authorization process improvements, continuous monitoring process improvements, and automation opportunities and initiatives. And I just wanted to commend the committee on their work on these 3 initiatives. I delivered the final edition of our memo to the GSA administrator on Tuesday, March 5th. You can view it on our website. She has since been briefed several times on the memo, understands much of it, and has started to work with the FedRAMP team on bringing the recommendations that you all came up with and put in the memo into the FedRAMP's roadmap, FedRAMP team's roadmap. So I just wanted you to know that we have completed the cycle on talking about what's important, trying to figure out how to create actionable recommendations, delivering them to the GSA administrator, and those recommendations have reached the FedRAMP team. This is a big deal. This is a new committee. It's a new organization. So I just wanted you to know that all of the work that you've done over the last year matters and is being actioned now. So let's celebrate this. I'd like to take a minute and just applaud everyone on achieving this goal. Like that happens. So let's do more of this year. Having completed our first set of key recommendations to the administrator, we now have the opportunity to start talking today about what our priorities are for the next year. What do we want to work on? What do we want to provide guidance on in this unique public-private conversation? There's, I think, a lot that we can do. And as always, the challenge is figuring out how to prioritize. So during our last administrative meeting, a few topics of interest were noted, and we'll now receive some additional information on those topics from briefed from folks in the room today. And so the topics that we're going to hear more about and consider that you've discussed in the previous meetings are updates to the draft OMB memo that OMB has made, what FedRAMP's response to these updates are, what is the third-party assessor stakeholder experience, and are there ways that we can improve that to support the third-party assessor marketplace, and a few other topics as well. So we'll get into the meat of some of those topics, and as always, the committee can drive this in whatever direction seems like it's most productive. We'll see if we can align on a set of priorities today. If not, that's okay. We can also continue this discussion later. So today our goal is to discuss the potential areas of interest of what we would like to prioritize over the next year and figure out if we can determine a plan of action for diving deeper into these topics. So thank you for your work last year. Looking forward to our work this year. And with that, I'll pass it back to Michelle.
All right, thank you so much, Ann. Now I'd like to open the floor to Drew Milkegaard, the Deputy Federal CIO from the Office of Federal CIO of the Office of Management and Budget, who will be presenting on their updates to the OMB draft memo titled Modernizing the Federal Risk Authorization Management Program, FedRAMP. Drew, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Michelle. Do you want me here or here? Which is more comfortable?
Whichever is fine. I just want you to be sort of closer to the owl so that you will appear on screen.
So I always learn a lot when I'm next to Jackie and Matt, so I'll cheat off his for my talking points. I just wanted first off, say good morning to everybody. For those of us that are balancing spring break and what things we have going on, I really appreciate you all timing this early like this because my kids are on spring break and they're teenagers. So by the time I get home, they will just be waking from like their slumber. And they'll be like, good morning, Dad. Are you going to do anything today? And I'm like, well, I've been already successful. So just wanted to talk quickly about a couple of areas. One is like the level of OMB leadership that is committed to the FedRAMP program. And I didn't know this, but OMB uses GSA as our execution arm. We don't have any, as you probably realize, we don't do anything internally besides write, but we can't execute, but we have valuable programs that we want to see move forward because they're presidential initiatives, and came up with 4 of them this year, and FedRAMP is one of the 4. And we've consistently worked with Ann and her team and Kunda to make sure that these efforts were prioritized. Also, I just want to mention, from an OMB leadership perspective, like our Deputy Director of Management, Jason Miller, his senior advisors, our CIO, always ask about FedRAMP. Partly because they hear about it from externally. There's, this is one of the great interactions we have with the commercial sector, but also they see the real value in this. They all been at agencies and know that like when they can get in software, they can execute their missions faster and better. The last part is just like in these sort of events, just want to remind that we all have multiple identities. Oftentimes I'm in meetings with a lot of other bureaucrats, government servants. This is a chance where like software providers, like I've read, I worked with Ann and another group to read all of your applications when you came on. And I was like, God, I'm glad I don't have to apply for this because I would like never be picked for a board like this. So it's great to have you all and great to be picking from such a great team from government. I know a lot of you, whether we worked in government, commercial sector, or just, focus groups that are helping try the government or helping the government work a little bit better. But I would also encourage all of you in these times where person, wearing face, like learn more about the people that we're working with, because for myself, like whenever I can, whenever we're writing policy or making budget decisions, when I know that there are people that are directly impacted on the other end, like I put in more time. So I'd encourage you all to just like make those relationships while we're in the room. Just want to give you what nobody cares about what I say up until this point, probably. So policy update. This is what everybody wants to hear. It's been 10 years since we wrote the last policy. We put the draft policy out. And first off, I just want to thank you to the FSCAC for your comprehensive and thoughtful comments on draft guidance. We have found, and this is in part to a lot of work that Eric Mill did and Chris DeRusha early on in the administration. OMB doesn't go out and seek feedback on our policies, but we've found that it actually iterates, makes better policy, much like software. We write a lot of waterfall in policy, and we're trying to be a little bit more iterative about it. But we have the same challenges internally. I would say that this has been, next to AI, like our most successful as far as getting feedback. We received 165 comments from at least 155 commenters, and we've reviewed each and every one of them. And we've sent out thank you notes to everybody that responded. So we really do appreciate it and have spent a lot of hours. It drives a lot of the way we think. I did want to mention that some of the commenters submitted multiple page documents, and we really appreciate that. I'm counting those as one comment and not like the total number. Otherwise, we'd be over 200 and really giving AI a run for its money. AI comes up in almost everything we seem to be doing these days. You all specifically raised some good points, and as we're updating this guidance, addressing both what we heard from you as well as broader community. And I think just like from a personal standpoint and writing that policy was, it's very challenging. You want it to endure, and then to put it out and get good and bad feedback makes it much better. So when I was reading the comments, I'm like, oh yeah, I struggled with that point, like red teaming, for instance. Like we really struggled with red teaming. Hearing from you all makes it a lot better. And we hope that this policy will endure. So the next area is hopefully me talking a little bit less and hearing from you all. So this is the assistance and going forward from the FSCAC. And we want to collect feedback in 3 areas. So I'm going to throw out these 3 areas and we'll go one by one and hope that you all give me like some pointers, like is this, like give me some steers on that. So the first one is FedRAMP and small businesses. So our prompt is provide additional insights into how FedRAMP can support small businesses in overcoming overcome challenges in obtaining and maintaining a FedRAMP authorization without comprising security rigor. We all want to see more small businesses. We're all dedicated to that. But we're not sure like the best ways to do that. How does that resonate with you all? Is that an area that's salient? Okay. Do you have, for you at agencies, is that something that you're challenged with? I know when I was at VA, Josh, like we had goals for what we were trying to get.
We do. It is hard to get a small business who especially has never done business with the government into the government in general, just through all of the procurement and all the other rules that apply, to then add what to them, I think, seems like a tax that doesn't exist in other markets. Makes it hard to attract. It's a difficult conversation every time we have it, and I don't know there's a great answer to it. I think we just kind of try to be as supportive as we can, but it's certainly been an issue, continues to be an issue.
And Jackie, being over at DISA, you're at a high level, so you get to see across all of the branches. Are you seeing a pathway or anything that works?
So I think part of this conversation is around SaaS and leveraging the infrastructure that we already have, infrastructure and PaaS, IaaS and PaaS for the use of SaaS. And we've not evolved FedRAMP to consider inheritance as we authorize SaaS. And so I think if we can pursue that path, it reduces cost to the small business. And I think cost is a barrier from what I have heard for small business entry into the FedRAMP marketplace. And so I think that is one area, when FedRAMP started, we were really focused on IaaS because that's where the industry was. Today, the industry is in SaaS. And so we've got to figure out a faster path and a less, again, without compromising security and that type of thing. But how do we make that possible, right? And so for some of our SaaS providers, we've tried to pair them with an IaaS or a big provider that says, can we get office space with you where we know you've got access to the network and help desk resources? And how do we pair up our small business and our large business to work together, whether that's inheritance or, sharing of resources. And again, trying to lower the cost as a barrier to entry. So from my perspective, that is one thing I think that this group could potentially tackle is how do we streamline that process and evolve our requirements and processes around evaluating SaaS.
So this side of the table, it's been like, how about you all? Anybody else?
So I'm a part of a software company, CSP, small business. So we've gone through this process end to end. So I was there when we built the initial business case for our company. So the pandemic, we make a sort of decision support tool. It's visual, widely used in the commercial world, movie studios, big businesses, Amazon's a big customer. So we have a big contract with the intelligence community. I only set this out that we didn't come into the FedRAMP world with no concept of what security is. Enterprise security, intelligence community, top secret. We've got some grounding and some good technology. Pandemic happens, and what we hear from DoD is that, look, if you're not FedRAMP approved, we can't. I mean, we're not even touch your software. So we make the business case to go through the FedRAMP process. We got a lot of great assistance along the way, really. And if you read my application, you'll know it. And we weren't. Our team was genuine when we wrote the application. That got great assistance from the FedRAMP PM. There was actually great educational materials online if you want to understand the process. We actually got great help from people on Jackie's team as well going through that. I mean, it's a process. It took 2+ years. There were a lot of delays. I'm not going to say it was super fast. And yes, there were a lot of costs incurred, but we did get through it. And we're still stumbling through it. In fact, we just had to have Jackie help us with something a few weeks ago. So we're getting through. The costs are an issue for a small software company. But my board will excuse it if there's revenue associated with the other end. And what I think and again, we need to improve the processes. Things need to be streamlined. I think it was a great comment from the public comment from the gentleman from Red Hat around, accelerating, I forgot how to put it, sort of accelerating the software procurement so people can get their missions faster. I think if we focused a little bit more on that for small businesses, how to get your product sold. And I would say probably for all the CSPs, people, and I've talked to other CSPs who maybe not on the committee, and they all say, yeah, FedRAMP's okay, but the return on the investment, doesn't matter what the investment is, it's, the return isn't quite there. And so I don't know how to give that feedback other than maybe if the pull for SaaS was stronger, then people would put up with more costs and more process time.
Just to keep going with that a little bit, like what kinds of metrics or outcomes do you think would couple that, like your small business and other small businesses' goals with the goals that are associated with the authorization processes now?
So it's not, I don't want to make this a process thing. It's a different than process because I think the first two comments were we need to make the process better, faster, cheaper. So I'm all with that. Literally, it's dollars. Like, you know, when the CFO of my board run the reports at the end of the month, how much did you sell? How many customers? Where's the, you know, it's basic classic business forecasting.
On the marketplace, and I haven't tried to sort this way, do you have criteria that says this is a small business? Because people need to look for small business. So is that part of the criteria? Do we have good descriptors and search criteria to say, I need a this? You know, and so how can the marketplace be shaped to help us get to small business? And it's been a while since I've got it filtered, so I'm usually looking for specific things.
I have some thoughts on that. And it's interesting because there's two policy worlds here that kind of collide, right? There's procurement, which is got a long history and, you know, obviously where I come from, that has a lot of like security does impact, I don't know, dogmas, maybe it's a good way to say it, around competition and what is a small business and how do we engage with them? I guess without getting into real specific things, like more consideration for how those two things merge together. So for a small business, there are different ways to set business aside for a small business, but FedRAMP doesn't really talk to that. And there's also not necessarily, to your point, an incentive on the back end of like, if I go through this, I can be guaranteed a certain amount of business. We do what we can and like at least VA to try to build flexible contracts that can give us a way to scale things, but that is perennially an issue. And the length of FedRAMP makes it a really hard value proposition for a company. So it's like, deal with the 6 months it takes to like deal with us and get money from us and get some footprint on the ground in terms of the contract, then wait 2 years or a year and a half. I know, but I'm trying to say a controversial timeline, 7 months, 10 months, it's still a long time. Build into that the complexities of the budget process and how we are asking for the money to pay for those things years out. It's really, really tough. And then pile onto that, to your point, Drew, around AI, right? So now there's another set of memos, a third very new infant, you know, in its infancy policy realm that's also playing in, and that's just like, go do these pilots, go care about these specific things that also have to consider FedRAMP and then all of the procurement and regulation rules. Just like small business seems like an opportunity where there's already small business set asides and things, just somehow create tools for people that are at the agencies buying things to make some of that easier. And then when I'm in the room with a small business at a conference and someone's selling us in something I know we would otherwise be interested in, we would have a path. We could say, you know, at least to the smaller vendors, and then you can even get into the, where do they get the money from to do those things as a small business, right? So they have to go to their investors, to, you know, private equity firms and stuff, and talk them into what I just described as like a good investment. You know, and a 3-year horizon for a small business is a very long time for them. So I just think FedRAMP has kind of been shoved into that conversation, and we are all, you know, even just telling us what we're supposed to be doing with the small business piece and are we allowed to set things aside would help the other side of that conversation, the lawyers and procurement officials and the agencies come to terms with when we ask you to do this. And from the IT side, yes, there's a, you know, OMB guidance and some regulation in that space.
If I could belabor this just a little bit further, not that everybody's isn't doing a fine job, but I tend to filibuster as well. I think I'm at my 5th federal agency now, and of all sizes now, small, large, everything in between, the VA, the OMB, the DOT, the SBA, the SEC. And during my time at SBA, you know, there's been a lot of focus there on getting the small businesses into government. That is a priority. That's a big part of the mission of SBA. I think we can all agree that small businesses aren't going and standing up by asses, right? They're not going to go and build a data center. They don't have that kind of capital. That's not going to happen. I've also seen in my spread of agencies that there's a lot of most of the people coming to me and wanting a small business solution that's a SaaS typically aren't coming from like central OIT. They're typically coming from a program office. And that impacts the small business because you're not getting the entire agency wanting to buy your solution. You're getting an office that maybe 15 people that want to buy your solution. And that is not a thing that you can get a return on investment unless you can get every single agency that wants that to come to the table. That's really hard. I don't think there are easy solutions for that because the juice isn't with the squeeze in most cases. But I will point back that it's probably outside the scope of our friends here at the table. But you all could do more work probably with SBA in leveraging the 8A program to be able to make more opportunities for that sort of funding for people to get through this process. Specifically working with the Hill to make sure that those dollars are being put so that these solutions can be funded by the government for the government to use. I think that's really critical because I don't think the money is going to come from the investors in most cases. They're not going to see that for the smaller ones that have the really interesting innovative products these days. So I think that is going to be probably one of the things that are going to be poked at. I will also be the cynic that I always am and say, I don't want to see the standards lowered. After we've seen the SolarWinds, after we saw with the Microsoft breach, even the biggest companies in the world are struggling with IT. Technology is hard. I've been a software developer for, I don't want to say, a long time. And we all, bugs happen. It's always going to happen. These vulnerabilities are always going to pop up, no matter how good your systems are, no matter how rigorous you are. And so as a person who runs a lot of IT, I don't want to see the standards lowered for small businesses. I'm sorry that's not what small businesses want to hear, but I have to protect my neck. So that is a priority for me, making the funding available so that they can meet the standards that everybody else has to hit, and using inheritance if they're just riding on top of an IS anyway. Like let's leverage the continuous ATO process and get them through that. So
definitely to echo Bill's point on inheritance, I think that's probably one of the quickest ways we could get to that level of like large CSPs delivering these controls to a GA level and then having small businesses right on top. I think that's probably one of the best nets we got. The other thing that I brought up last time, and I just want to flag again, is that NASA's got a really great technical readiness level risk management program where they have different levels of scope and impact versus the technical controls that are in place, and they graduate those technologies up, right, until they're ready for humans. We should do something similar or have a similar path in our program where that would unlock small businesses to be able to use maybe a smaller set of controls for a specific targeted mission or a specific targeted program. And then as they're growing into more and more adoption, we kind of crank, right, and turn on more and more levels of control on them. I know we have low, medium, high right now. Maybe that's something we should look at. Moderate, so low, moderate, high. Maybe that's something we should look at in 2024. Maybe there's a better path that we could put in place to think about how we could think about pilot programs versus, large CSPs delivering for hundreds of agencies and customers.
I could add on just to tag on to that, the low impact SaaS offering, I think is probably most in terms of what we have currently in line with kind of that first step, maybe very narrow use case or still that kind of thing. So I just wanted to add that. And then one thing, so Marcy, Shawna, 3PAO perspective. So, we have a pretty limited purview in terms of like before CSPs get to us and after they get to us. It's like during the assessment and authorization life cycles when we deal with them the most. But what we hear from our clients is that they kind of they anticipate that they'll get an authorization and then agencies will be banging down their doors to use their products, and that's not the case. So it's more of like what happens after, and maybe that's an education, maybe it's awareness, maybe I don't know, but I think that there's the expectation versus the reality post authorization.
Yeah, please. So Naman Ansari from the Small Business Administration. I want to talk about 2 points here. So first, from the procurement side, when we get to execution, we're not frankly thinking about certification standards. Those need to already have been baked into the requirements that are presented to the procurement professional contracting officer. And then what drives that decision it's speed to contract. So what's category management driving us? If we can get to a set aside in the 8A program, or are there any other sole source authorities? Those are the kind of the driving factors in terms of what procurement we want to get to. So I think one of the ways that this issue can be addressed is programs that have worked successfully. So mentor protege has allowed, and I think it's worked really well at DHS, when I spend my time there. It gives program offices a level of comfort on larger scale projects to have bandwidth and capacity of a large business, but mobility and ingenuity of a small business working together. So maybe that's a path to mitigating some of the issues that we're coming across. Also, the programs like SPIC, the Small Business Investment Company, SCTR. So there are all those programs that currently exist at the SBA that offer funding, that offer grants to small businesses in the technology and innovation space. Maybe we can leverage some of those funds and redirect them towards this effort. I'd be happy to connect with you and put you in touch with the right individuals in those offices to see if there's opportunities there.
I would appreciate that. That's an area that I feel like we underutilize. Yeah.
Drew, I mean, one thing that we do here at GSA, we work a lot with a lot of OT/IoT service providers that are increasingly providing SaaS-based solutions. EVSC being one right now, as well as a lot of smaller companies that provide SaaS-based services. And, similar to what Michael was describing, what NASA does, we actually have an agile risk-based authorization process that allows us to be able to get to the services provided by a cloud service provider using more of an incremental approach. And the way that works from a contract acquisition standpoint is that you either are FedRAMP authorized, or as part of the contract acquisition, they essentially have to go through and achieve an authorization through what we call our LiSaaS or our MySaaS processes, which is really focused on a subset of the very technical set of controls corresponding to the FedRAMP baseline, be it low or moderate, requires they effectively run on top of an existing FedRAMP authorized platform or infrastructure. And what this benefits is a vendor to allow for them to start to realize revenue while they're working through the FedRAMP authorization process. And it provides the government an ability to be able to understand their technical architecture, understand their cyber hygiene, and how that well they actually perform in the delivery of their responsibilities that relates to cybersecurity. So, and as they move through that process, the initial LiSaaS authorization allows us to be able to use certain functions, features, and expand to certain sets and certain volumes of information, and based on that initial authorization. And once they move forth with the FedRAMP authorization, that's when those guardrails effectively come off to allow them to be able to go through and realize the full functions and features of that SaaS offering. We found this to be incredibly helpful for the majority of the SaaS solutions at GSA, particularly those that are low impact. They've all facilitated through an initial LiSaaS authorization and then promoted into a FedRAMP tailored authorization or a FedRAMP low or FedRAMP moderate authorization. So this agile notion, I think, is really important because it does go through and talk about inheritance, leveraging existing infrastructures, platform providers that are FedRAMP authorized. It does allow for the challenges that John was talking about relative to revenue recognition and be able to go through and justify to their boards and companies around continued investment to be able to go through and, justify the ongoing commitment to the FedRAMP program and the changes that higher level authorizations would typically require.
Well, I think that's a really powerful idea, and I thank you for detailing the process that your CISO shop uses at GSA. I wonder what it would take to encourage other CISOs or CIO shops to consider a model like that, doing incremental risk assessment. And then I also wonder, what's the what layer between having that process at more agencies, if it makes sense, and small businesses knowing about that and being able to pursue contracts with those agencies where there might be a path available for them to, while they're getting FedRAMP, go through an incremental risk assessment process like LiSaaS. Because this is something that that you've heard of or you've encountered, when you are exploring government contracting opportunities?
So I think the question's for me again, John, from Bluescape. I'd have to learn more about, what Bo's describing. So, when I will go back to the point I think Bill made that, the interesting thing about selling SaaS and why SaaS is so great for, why it's taken over the software application world is in the commercial world, you start small. You start with a project team. You start with 10 users, 15 users. You charge a per user per month price. Maybe you lock them into a 1-year contract that's very flexible that people can scale up and true up at the end and as usage expands. It still means that first touch point into an agency, the first touch point into a customer is $5,000 sale. I don't know, I'm taking a random number, but could be even lower than that. Yeah, probably a little higher, but the point being it's still, so I'd have to learn more about Bo's commitment. People want to try before they buy, they put on 15, 20, 50 users. It's, there's still some sort of, I think, either marketing or incentive piece missing. Because the business case doesn't extend potentially to the entire agency. It might end up still having to do a lot of work just in an individual agency for just a project team of 15 or 20 person. You add tremendous value for that team, but the costs, sometimes outweigh. So again, I don't know enough about both process. I don't know if I answered your question, Ann.
You did, yeah. I think it's something that would be helpful to consider, like, is the model that Bo is describing something that could be scaled out to more agencies? Is there a way of better reaching small businesses? It sounds like you're describing kind of like a freemium or starter model that then would lead to an enterprise level contract, which would then start some sort of security monitoring process. I guess just to completely broaden the scope, Naman, from the SBA's perspective, is this something that SBA considers or is part of the strategic planning process? Is SaaS specific strategies for enabling small businesses to have more incremental on-ramps into agencies based on 15 licenses that then grow into a larger contract, or parallelizing FedRAMP authorization with an incremental risk assessment process? Is that something that's?
So I don't think SBA currently has something specific for FedRAMP, but just the model of allowing small businesses to grow and incrementally achieve an end state is a model that's been applied by SBA regs for many different programs. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities, I think, to rely on the government contracting business development side of the house of SBA and see what we can do.
I do, I'm sorry, one more point, and just interesting, because you did bring up the SIBR and SCTR process. And I've known other small business, other small CSPs who've tried to, and maybe just an idea throughout, I don't know legally if it's possible or how any of this stuff works, because I'm not a government person, unfortunately. I know actually two other small businesses that either got or tried to get SCTRs or SIBRs, specifically money set aside to help with the FedRAMP process. So that was the deliverable as part of the SIBR. Now, that's not the way most SIBR announcements or comps come out. They come out to solve a mission, solve a problem. But the barrier to sometimes solving the problem is you don't have the accreditation ahead of time. So there's this like, if there was some sort of SIBR milestone and fund set aside or assistance to help someone who wins the SIBR get through the accreditation process, maybe that's an idea. Again, I don't know if that's even feasible or just throwing it
I
out.
think it's something we're looking at for sure.
Sorry to interrupt. I did want to do a time check. We've got about 1 minute left on this. I wanted to make sure that you got all of your.
Yeah, I was worried I wouldn't, like, nobody would respond. Yeah, it's just, how their day was when they come home from school. But no, thank you. The last two, and probably have to take these offline. The first one is just cost around the FedRAMP process. And there's two that we look at from OMB, and just in full transparency, we have like only urban legends and anecdotal information here, but it's how much it costs for an agency to bring in a CSP, including ongoing ConMon. I think, Jackie, you have probably some of the best numbers. And then the other one is how much it costs for a CSP. And the challenge is, like, if you're somebody that's done a lot of work with the federal government and you understand the RMF framework and understand what you're going to go through, like, it's always faster. if you're an amazing Silicon Valley company that's gonna change the world, and like you don't understand the way that we look at risk, it's a little bit harder. So we're really trying to dig in what the FedRAMP costs are in a consistent way. And then the last one, and this would really, this is more than anything, just a call to help us make OMB better and the program better, is around metrics. So what metrics can we put out that aren't easily gained, that would show both transparency on our side, allow us to improve the program over time, and then provide the most value to CSPs, so that, you know, like John, you talked about like signaling in different ways. I feel like if we can consistently signal through the right metrics, like this is what, even though dealing with the federal government isn't for the faint of heart, this is what it really looks like. And looks like over a couple of years. So those are my three. The first one's great. I wish we had more time, but Michelle's going to keep me honest and not let me go over, but the metrics would be great for us.
I think just, you know, in terms of the cost, I think, as well as the metrics, I think we need to be thinking about this both in terms of pre-house vendors and agencies.
Yeah.
Right. And the benefit and effectiveness, I think, need to be across all stakeholders that are engaged in this process. You know, in terms of metrics, I mean, I think we can probably sit down and talk about, you know, what agency specific metrics would be, especially when we're having discussions around risk and security and not wanting to lower the bar to be able to go through and facilitate. You know, we have incidents all the time. Like, we correlate incidents to FedRAMP authorizations in terms of the level and quality of authorizations relative to the expected outcomes that we intend. Particularly relative to this process, right? We see fewer incidents corresponding to FedRAMP authorizations versus other type environments. I think there's a value in a story to be told there that I think we're probably not taking advantage of.
Yeah, agreed. And sorry, Michelle, but one additional point that I'd add to the cost conversation, Drew, is that it's not just the cost of doing the FedRAMP stuff, it's the cost of taking a system in some state of maturity and bringing it up to a level of system security maturity and security ops. And all small businesses are coming from someplace. They need to get to a place where we have common language around what good enough for government means. But the cost there is like, it needs to be aware of where small businesses are coming from. Once they've reached a certain level of maturity where they think they could handle federal scale on a contract, then it's what does it take to bridge the gap to go from some database that everyone can log into to, oh, wait, we have to encrypt data at risk. We have to do like credential management. It needs to be independently audited, et cetera. So I think to make sure that we're measuring something meaningful, it's understanding where small businesses in the ecosystem are starting from and then the cost to get up to that necessary maturity level.
If I could have 30 seconds, Bill Hunt, FSCAC again. When we're talking about the agencies and the financing on that side, I will flag that us small agencies have very unique needs, and we are very hungry for these sorts of tools. We do not have the budgets to necessarily take them through the process. You know, we have a flat budget from last year to this year, so I don't have dollars to do any of this stuff, but we desperately need these solutions today, and we can't really wait for them. So we are eager to be labs to try this stuff out, but we do not have the budget to execute.
Is it the FedRAMP? Can you ATO or is that even too expensive?
ATOs are very,
Yeah.
just as expensive,
Yeah,
basically.
that's what we found, even at a bigger agency with more resources. Yeah.
Which is also why we need the exception process, which was something about.
Yeah, just that landed very well, by the way. Good, yeah, appreciate that.
All right, well, thank you, Drew, and thank you to the committee for had a very engaging conversation. Definitely appreciate it. Now I'd like to welcome to the floor Eric Mill, who is now the Executive Director for Cloud Strategy at GSA. Dory Singer, she is the Agency Engagement Lead for FedRAMP, and Ryan Palmer, the Senior Technical and Strategic Advisor at FedRAMP. They have kindly joined us today to provide additional information on FedRAMP certified so that everyone be memos. Eric, sorry, Ryan, thank you for joining us today. Thank you. Your seat's available.
All right, thanks for having us and thanks for the introduction. You're mostly going to hear from Ryan and Zari today, but I thought I'd just give a very brief introduction. So we're going to talk through FedRAMP's public plans today in more detail than I think folks are maybe used to hearing from the program looking forward. And there's, this presentation will have some detail. There's actually going to be a lot more that you can find online today. We'll have some posts going out. We'll have a roadmap artifact that gets published on the web. So we'll be happy to answer, of course, some questions here, but there'll be more there. There's been a lot of focus here on Congress and OMB's important work on FedRAMP. We just talked a lot about OMB's, which is an active item. On the agency side at GSA, what we really have to do is focus on, on the machine that we have, on the implementation, of organizing our efforts, prioritizing what we do, sequencing things in time, reallocating resources. And it's a different problem, and it's a very important one. Right? So the number one question that I get when I'm out talking, or the team gets when they're dealing with folks is, how are you actually going to be able to do all of these seemingly infinite hopes and dreams people have for the FedRAMP program? Right. And we do have to actually pick an order in which you do things and which things you're going to focus on first. And we've been engaged in the process of doing that. And one of the things I also really want to point to is that, we're making a significant effort to make sure we're delivering some tangible evidence on a number of these things early enough in the process that we're both showing some momentum for ourselves and our stakeholders, as well as just being able to course correct and get feedback early so we can change. Same kind of agile principles that folks who work on software products keep in mind as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan and Zari. We'll take us through.
All right, go ahead. Okay, so as Eric said, we are today going to be releasing our first big sort of public roadmap that is a response to all of our stakeholder feedback about many of the challenges that we have, but in particular that really the program's growth is not enough yet to meet the needs of the market. It's meant to organize all of our work around a clear set of strategic goals and make sure that we're prioritizing around them. And it's also meant to really communicate publicly that we're committed to modernizing with enough key details to show how and why. So as Eric mentioned, there's a little line here, but we're going to be posting a blog later with a lot more context on that today. You can go to the next one, Doris. Thank you so much. Okay, so we reviewed the recommendations of this group, so thank you all so much for that. We are hopeful that you will see in the details of the roadmap many of the recommendations that you put forth. So in service of more flexible and secure authorizations, we do intend to support reciprocity with external frameworks with the ultimate goal of making sure that cloud providers do not have to redo work just for FedRAMP. We also are going to make sure that we include guidance for how agencies can securely configure their services. So how they can administer things like Slack and Google, which was a great recommendation from this group. Of course, we'll be automating, we'll be establishing a technology platform for integrating with agencies and CSPs. We're going to be continuing to work on promoting OSCAL adoption and then using that as a foundation for further automation. And we're going to be focusing on streamlining the post-authorization process. So bringing more continuous monitoring activities into the PMO and making sure that all of that is scalable through automation and OSCAL. Okay. In terms of our 4 strategic goals. So the first one is really orienting FedRAMP around the customer experience and in a different way than we have before. So making sure that we're really clearly and regularly at a regular cadence identifying what our customers' challenges and obstacles are, and then being responsive to those. And this is going to include taking more of a stance on things like time and costs in a way that really is directly aligning with what our customers are saying that they're experiencing. We want to position the program as a leader in cybersecurity and risk management, bringing more expertise directly into the program and the FedRAMP ecosystem more broadly. we need to significantly scale the size of the marketplace. So this will include reciprocity. This will include just more options generally via paths, authorization paths. And we also need to increase our program effectiveness through technology for operations. So all things off-scale and automation. And so I'm going to pass it to Ryan to talk through some of the details.
So as we look at orienting around our customer experience, that's a big part of it. We are looking at some of the areas that we got feedback on OMB, this group as well, but also looking at where our customers are having difficulties. And also things that are driving like gaps in the features available to the government, right? More services in there meeting the government mission and needs. One of the first things we're looking at is how we can better allow agile change processes. We all know the current SCR process is a blocking. We want to move that to something where, we're still having, positive security outcome. We still understand that, but we go to a non-blocking way and we communicate what was done to the government after that change is made. And that may not cover every change request, but the vast majority of those changes could probably be accommodated in a non-blocking way. We also want to look at engaging on some known key obstacles that the cloud service provider has had over time. These have been consistent things with boundary guidance, mainly with external services, but also looking at like some of the cryptography challenges that people have dealt with where you're asking, do I need to be compliant or do I need to be secure? How do I navigate that? We need to provide better guidance and help people navigate that. From a navigation of FedRAMP in general, we're going to work to better deliver on the knowledge base and other information. We understand that our consumers aren't just ISOs and ISMs. These are people who have technical backgrounds. These are people in 3PAOs. How can we get better guidance and make sure it's available to everybody in the right way? So we are speaking to them. And when they start that FedRAMP journey, it's much easier. From this group, I want to call it one thing that we've heard a lot about, and this is secure configuration profile. So now we have a marketplace listed cloud service. How do I configure that? I know GSA has done a lot of work with some vendors to bring in and say, hey, this is how we're going to configure this. How can we scale that? CISA is doing a lot of great work with Scuba. So we want to partner with CISA and figure out how we can make that approach scale out. And that can benefit both agencies using a service, but also cloud service providers who may be leveraging a SaaS solution as an external service. Next slide. The other thing we're going to be looking at is trying to be more of a leadership role in cybersecurity and also taking maybe in a more opinionated view. One thing we want to do is really make sure that FedRAMP has a meaning within the marketplace. I know right now there's maybe perceptions of differences between this authorization and that authorization, right? There should be a perception of what the core authorization of FedRAMP means within the marketplace and making sure that everybody understands that. So we have trust and we can enable the presumption of adequacy, both from an agency use, but also when a CSP may want to use another CSP. You shouldn't have to be asking, is this going to become a problem when I'm architecting or engineering my system? One of the other things we're going to work on is reciprocity. We're going to start with something that we feel is achievable, and that is reciprocity at the low baseline level of services already on like NetPass or IaaS, very much in line with what Bo outlined with GSA's process. So a lot of these frameworks have similar assessment needs, right? If you've already done a pen test, can we use and leverage some of the artifacts? If you've already written how you're addressing some policy statements, how can we incorporate that work and potentially even assessment work so we don't have to do it again, especially at those lower levels? I think there's a lot of opportunities to partner with other organizations to figure out how we can norm those baselines or maybe tailor those baselines to better reflect practices without lowering the bar of security. Next slide. We want to grow the size of the trusted marketplace. We had a lot of growth of all different sorts of services, but the focus on SaaS and a lot of products aren't really even available sometimes in a non-cloud offering nowadays when you look at things like emerging technology. One of the ways we are going to do that is work with trusted agency partners and also joint authorization groups to kind of get more. Right now, our agency review process is something that takes time. we have more people who are producing those high quality outputs, we can get things listed on the marketplace easier, which also means that your listed dressing, that time to be able to market and sell in some cases should hopefully go down. The other thing we're going to look at is trying to centralize continuous monitoring. By centralizing that, it's a cost save across all those different agencies who are having to do that work, a lot of times manually, like this is going to require automation. But also, we heard some comments from Red Hat earlier. How are we approaching vulnerabilities? If we start doing this centrally, we can probably take more innovative approaches to using that data and being more focused on the risks and real threats and maybe a little less focused on things that aren't really exploitable, because we will have it in a data format. And the last slide, sorry, my last slide. One of the big things we've heard is we need to automate. We haven't had a FedRAMP platform. That's going to be key in a lot of these improvements. The other thing is performance metrics, right? Making sure they're tied to the customers. We are going to be working, we've heard a lot of questions today about metrics, like what metrics are meaningful to different groups. We want to make sure our metrics are aligned to our customers' experiences, whether that be agencies or CSPs who are entering the marketplace. We are going to be working to establish a new technology platform. This is conventionally, I think, called a GRC tool, but our goals for that are a lot more than just, hey, we have your compliance documents. Like there's a lot of power in being able to automate processes, being able to share data, being able to do things like inheritance, right? How make it easier for a CSP that's built on, an IaaS or PaaS. How can I inherit these controls? How do we make sure that these are clear? They don't have to be assessed again. That lowers costs and will drive better outcomes. We're also going to be looking for transitioning to digital authorization packages. Those are going to be backed by the OSCAL data format. That means we can use APIs from CSPs to our solution, from our solution to an agency solution. We're going to be working with the community to figure out how to better do that. I think of it similar to e-filing taxes. Right now, a lot of stuff is mailed in, it's uploaded to a repository. People need access. They're having to do the manual processes and manual review work. We start getting those in a digital format, we unlock a lot of opportunities to improve our processes.
Okay, so we spent a lot of time thinking about what the world will look like for FedRAMP as we go through this work. For our cloud providers, we expect that they can see how to deploy changes without being blocked on federal approval, that they can use and contribute to a growing public knowledge base that provides guidance on how to actually implement controls with real examples. That they can confidently build, validate, and submit a digital authorization package and are actually seeing their own experience reflected in our metrics and how the program is focused on and operating. We expect that agencies will have a platform that will ease their overall authorization and review process. That initially our pilot partners should see a reduced burden in terms of our review of their authorization package. And then, of course, as that expands, more and more agencies seeing that as well. And that there's more experienced technical staff that's part of the organization and helping to lead FedRAMP. And then we also, of course, expect there to be a central repository that accommodates all authorization packages, and that all agencies have the tools that they need to do their authorization reviews. And with that, I think we'll open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Eric, Zari, and Ryan. I'd like to now open it up to the committee to ask any questions that you may have from the FedRAMP office presentation. At this time, please go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question, and I'll call on you in the order that you have raised your hands. I'll go ahead and start. Anybody have any questions? Oh, go ahead.
While we still have OMB in the room, do you all have the necessary funding to do all of these wonderful things that you've described? No. I know you have to give the GSA answer, but you can couch that however you.
Yeah.
A wink, a nod.
The interesting thing, part of what I alluded to at the beginning here is that's basically the number one question that we get when we go out there. I had that in a public speaking event last week. And what, you know, what I said there as well, so here, is that, you know, we're very focused right now on making sure that our machine is pointed in the right direction, so that as, you know, as money is invested in the FedRAMP program, people know where it's going. And they know that the outcomes that they're seeing are going to be the things that are accelerated and built on, right? And so I think the work, hopefully what you see in the work that's gone into this and what you'll see coming out of the team is gonna, you know, help to answer that question. And so that's the GS answer you'll get from us today.
I'll keep a very close eye on the TTS hiring page then.
I would be remiss not to mention on that topic that we are in fact hiring a FedRAMP director, and there'll be some information sessions coming up next week with a posting going online later in April, likely.
Thank you.
Any other, Jackie, go ahead.
So, just in line with those questions, do you have any sense of that, Branko from SIDA, any sense of timelines?
We do. Actually, we have one, we can pull that up if people want to see. This is part of what will be in the public. Darcy, can you pull up the last slide? Yeah, right here. Perfect. Yeah. So at sort of at a high level, the items in, of course, FY24, the ones that we are first up in priority. So we're working to pilot that SCR process. That's one of the first things we'll be doing, and then also focus on kind of an MVP version of the knowledge base. Of course, as Eric mentioned, a lot more expertise going to be coming into the program. We have guidance updates that are coming. So everything that you see kind of here on the FY24 side is the nearer term things. And the way we thought about kind of prioritizing our work overall was things that will increase throughput and capacity we're doing first. So that is our focus.
All right, Jackie, go ahead. One of the things that I want to call your attention to is one of the customers that we continuously leave out really of this process is the authorizing official who's using the SaaS or the capability, right, the cloud. And making sure that our GRC is available for them to inherit so that they can build their package so that they have a shorter road to on-ramp to production. So I wear two hats. And so making sure that I have real good availability to the FedRAMP repository, which is not real strong today. Making sure that data is available in the GRC, making sure I can inherit and pull, if I can't directly do that, based on whatever GRC is full, that I can at least get a package that can be loaded in. So I understand what the customer responsibility matrix is, what controls I have to take care of, those kind of things. We've got to make sure that the end process to actually, because we got to, you know, FedRAMP, and then we got to do the ATO at the end. So how do we, in my role, and so how do we get to that point where we recognize, you know, and part of that is our configuration guidance that you talked about, which is really critical. But it's also being able to pull in all of those controls. And then my second comment is, as we look at our automation efforts, we really need to figure out in OSCAL, and it may be there, how we actually assess our technical controls on the system, put those into machine readable format, and correlate those back to the 853 controls. So that it informs compliance, so that we're not having to take a 3PAO's time for that 55–60% that actually is automated through benchmarks. So how do I read my benchmark data? How do I incorporate that into my GRC, process it to inform the controls so that I never have to look at a piece of paper? I don't have to do a manual assessment of the system. A lot of our cloud providers are just so large, you can't do that at scale. And so how do we look at that for consistency across the cloud provider's infrastructure? So I offer that. And then as we look at automation as well, I think we need to start looking at our SaaS providers and figuring out what a container scan would look like, what a code scan would look like. You know, we've moved to that level. Again, we've moved from IaaS all the way up to SaaS. So how do I assess the quality of the software? That's one of DoD's really big focuses right now, is we're finding a lot of our vulnerabilities in our exfil of data is because of lack of solid software control. So how do I start to bring in my software efficacy testing as we move down the automation path?
just, because you guys don't have enough work to do through, 25. Just to echo a point that Jackie made, particularly around centralizing Conmon. I would argue a lot of agencies perhaps don't actively review the Conmon output corresponding to the CSPs that they use. And the current deliverables are CSP specific. And as we all know, I mean, from a cyber perspective, it's an aggregated risk, right? We have a combination of CSP solutions that we use across each of our respective agencies. And one thing, if you're thinking about centralizing Conmon, would be to think about developing a central agency dashboard that provides an aggregated risk across the set of CSP solutions that are actively being used. This would essentially, help authorizing officials to understand their cloud security risks, their data risks, particularly relative to their cloud ecosystem that they use, versus having to go through and review individual CSP specific reports, which by itself is helpful, but it doesn't tell the full story, right? Because increasingly we're looking at supply chain related considerations and how all of these CSP solutions integrate into one another, I think tell a bigger story. And this could potentially go upwards, not just at an agency level, but rather across government in terms of what our overall national exposure might be, individually to a SolarWinds type event versus individually across the set of solutions that we're actively using. Something to think about. But as we're moving towards a database driven type model, putting something like that together, I'm not saying it's easy, but it should be more readily achievable.
Absolutely agree. Like those are both very cognizant point. One of the things I don't think we talked about is we are planning on partnering with DHS to try to pipe certain data, not all the data, but enough data to power dashboards through the CDM program. Doesn't mean we won't also have that sort of data or dashboards available in the tool, but we understand agencies may already have dashboards, so we want to integrate with and leverage those experiences agencies may or authorizing officials may already be used to. Through the GRC tool, it will allow us a lot of opportunities. We are looking for automation partners, like all this stuff, we want to do pilots. We want to build partnerships so we can test these things early on and keep revising that. We need to integrate between systems, and that's why we're working on OSCO.
And you didn't give me a perfect yet, promise, but I was gonna offer, this is Mike from large CSPs. I have a lot of CSPs, right, that are very interested in making FedRAMP successful and being parts of these pilots. So anything we can do to offer up pilots, resourcing, public knowledge, please reach out to me and I'll get you connected with all of the organizations that are lined up, ready for this.
Thank you so much.
I have a question. I was just looking at the timeline that was shared. So one thing as an assessment firm that we're good or bad, really familiar with is integrations and relationships between various frameworks, and how they map or don't map or relate to FedRAMP and the various baselines. Obviously, FedRAMP is very data centric. It's system centric, but data, federal data, federal metadata. There are very few standards that follow the same flow. So I guess when I see this, I saw it was focused on the FedRAMP flow baseline. Is that kind of the only target? Is there any anticipation that we would expect external frameworks to be mapped or get granted reciprocity with moderate or high?
I think that's like an ongoing challenge. I think starting with low is an approachable thing. I think as we, get feedback from the community, which I think is really important, right? Like this is a goal. We can start with low, build that out, see how that's working, and partner with Cloud Security Alliance and these other framework people and say, how can we kind of norm on something that does work? Reciprocity doesn't have to be 100%. We can cover 70 or 50% of those controls at least. That's still a cost reduction and a reduction in duplicative work.
The simplest answer is that we want to be able to do something more than the low baseline. We see the same challenges that you're describing, and I think this is the best way to start by tackling.
Do you have frameworks that you're targeting?
Right now, I think we're looking at SOC 2, ISO, like CSA. but we're certainly open, and if we can map to it, especially with OSCAL and being able to look at these different data exchange, we should hopefully allow more flexibility to say like, hey, these across 7 frameworks, these all map to the same control, and we can do that through data. That'll also mean that if you have your own tool, that means you only have to write once, use many. And I think that's already happening a lot of times with CSPs and probably 3POs is my suspicion.
And we do have a question from Daniel Payne, who is, had to join us virtually this week because he's in the middle of the move. Daniel, go ahead.
Thanks, I appreciate the clarification. Daniel Payne, Databricks. First off, I appreciate the presentation. It's fantastic to hear all these things that are going on. There's a bunch of areas that speak to guidance and clarifications to be developed, to various parties. I'm just curious, kind of in general, a lot of the conversations that we've had over the last, kind of half year that I've been part of this have been around, interpretations of controls, interpretations of requirements, both across from agencies, 3PAOs and PMO, and sort of minimum standards, if you will. I'm curious if any of that kind of applies to things like, minimum risk thresholds or mandatory implementations, i.e. FIPS 140-2, or just in general, clarifying requirements across the board so that when agencies are talking to CSPs, when CSPs are talking to the PMO, everybody's speaking the same language and we're all kind of on the same page.
The knowledge, yes, that is a challenge, and that's something we want to address. The knowledge base, one of the things around that, why we want to provide technical examples in that is so we are clear in our communication to our different stakeholders. The other thing that knowledge base will allow is more visibility across those different roles. So we understand that, we're providing a response to the CSP at info@, we're providing another response to a 3PA. These might be tangential questions, but or similar questions, but we're not providing visibility to different stakeholder groups of the answers we're giving. We want to address that with the knowledge base. And as far as navigating some of those challenges, we do need to do that, but we need to provide that guidance for all those different stakeholder groups. So
Yeah. The entire objective is getting those kinds of things out of individual meetings and discussions and available to everybody.
There is an implication there in the knowledge base too, and we talked about examples that I want to call out, which is that, like, we want to put out real world examples of how real companies have really made it through the FedRAMP process before. And that means that, we'll likely be asking companies to be a little bit more comfortable sharing some version of what they may have done that could help other people come through behind them. Like, that's going to be important to the FedRAMP program, and we'll be looking for a spirit of collaboration there wherever possible.
I have one more question. This is Mike from Google. The revision process itself, is that something you also are looking at in terms of how do we move this baseline or communication as things change if we're going a little bit more agile now?
we certainly have to do that as we're open to be, yes, we have to do that. Yes, we know it's going to be a challenge. We need feedback is one way that will really help us there. We know we can't move the goal line when someone's halfway through an assessment. So versioning that and some sort of confidence that, hey, I'm working to these requirements today, they're going to be good for at least this amount of time. It is really important, and we're cognizant of that challenge.
We have talked about that a fair amount internally, and the idea too about the necessity of maybe having to distinguish, what applies going forward, what applies going backwards for some periods of time, just from a change management perspective. But we don't want a concept of change management, of how daunting that is to stop us from making some kind of progress on it. So yeah, we talked about that a lot. You should hopefully see that reflected at least a little in what we publish.
Any other questions?
I have one more. If we could go back to the timeline slide, what is on the far right, release draft expert risk assessment framework, red teaming? What does that mean?
So in the draft OMB memo, right, there is some cases where we might want to look at expert risk assessment. I think there's a lot of different potential use cases. One thing I would be excited about is if we identify where, like, there's an alternative implementation in place that couldn't be tested by like a conventional assessment or team, we could look at ways where we could bring in a red team to validate that that technology is providing some sort, that similar level of security and control. that's one potential use case. I think there could be other thresholds and criteria. One of the things we have talked about, I think, in earlier phases here, which is partnering with CISA on when we would do those red teams and under what conditions. I think there's a very, very positive opportunities there to use those red teams to kind of validate new technology or new approaches to security.
I can offer one piece of guidance, just the terminology is triggering because of the new CAA2 requirements. And so if that, I think there's an opportunity for a lot of confusion, so that could be potentially.
Yeah, we've started to see some of that ourselves, honestly. And so that makes sense. We've had to go out of our way to distinguish between those two things a lot. So definitely heard.
This is Mike again. The one thing I wanted to add to is a little bit of a challenge. I hear a lot talking about cost benefit trade-off earlier. Low as a baseline has a very low return on investment. So a lot of companies really focus on moderate and high, especially as they get larger. So just keep that in mind. Like, we should definitely be challenging you to push into moderate and high as fast as possible with some of these updates, because the return on investment makes more sense for CSPs.
Jackie?
To tag on to that comment, we talked about the iterative type of ATO or agency evaluation. I would encourage to start at moderate because that is your CUI data. And if I had to guess, the majority of yours are going to be dealing with CUI data. And so starting at low really reduces the applicability of its use for systems that need a capability that are operating with CUI data. So I would probably look at, as someone described it, is a moderate baseline with a set of the technical controls that are most critical to authorization. So in our system world, we start with auditing and authentication is our critical cornerstones. And then that's the barrier to entry, that they have to meet privacy standards, auditing, authentication, and choosing some of those boundary protection and those types of controls. And so we call it our subset of controls just to get in the door, right? But at least we know that we can process the type of data that's available to us. And so I would just caution you on the low moderate issue is to start with moderate, but look at your control set and not focus as much on the impact level, but on the controls you implement.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the reciprocity piece is the only place where we're saying we're starting with low.
Okay.
More generally, I think a lot of the stuff is most applicable to modern.
Yeah, from a CFP perspective, I've talked about low in years.
Yeah.
Like real impact.
Well, you have a lot of low things that are growing, especially on the tailored and live SaaS side, but absolutely, yes, what you're saying is right.
And Josh, if you'd like, could you come up to the table? I'm sorry, just so that you.
I just wanted to third the point about low, working at an agency that most of the small specifically SaaS products are going to be health based. Low is just really something it's helpful.
Any other questions that we have? Does the committee have any questions for Drew? We can also bring him back up to answer these questions before we take our break.
I appreciate you putting time on that, Michelle, because otherwise, like, I'd be like, well, I've always wanted to ask.
All right, well, it sounds like everybody's ready for their break, so we'll go ahead and take a break. We, please be back by 11:45. Oh, sure, yeah, Mike.
We are going to. Yeah, whenever we're there.
Kratos and Lee Nieper, who is the Director of Quality Management at A-Line. They will both be sharing their experience as 3PAs in the FedRAMP process. This panel is designed to be less formal and more conversational. We've asked Jem and Lee to respond to several guiding questions about their experience working with FedRAMP. Committee members are invited to ask additional questions they may have for Jem or Lee during the conversation. Does anyone have any questions about the process? Okay, great. With that, Jem and Lee, thank you for joining us today. Go ahead and share your experiences.
I feel like a lot of thunder has already been taken. I've seen a lot of my ideas up there, so.
I think it's good progress. I think, this is Jim Knighting from Kratos. I've been around the compliance game for my entire career. I started back in 2004 implementing FSMA programs at government agencies and did a decade of that and then came right into FedRAMP because, got to ride the wave. It's going cloud first and all that stuff came out. But I think we should be proud of what we built here. And I know when we have our challenges and things that are going on, we talk about the reciprocity thing and we talk about, leveraging other frameworks. Well, what other frameworks want to leverage us because, out in the economy, it's FedRAMP first. It's like we have put in place the most rigorous trusted framework to date that I've seen. And it brings reliability and it's made some large improvements over what FSMA was. Just think if we were trying to apply FSMA in the cloud environment today. It's that use once, do once, use many times principle. That's important. And that saves a lot of costs that are coming into this. And it was interesting when I heard about the small business. Whereas, leveraging the IaaSes and the PaaSes to come through. And we have to be a little bit careful there. Because those small businesses may become capabilities or services on those platforms and IaaSes too. So they can lose their identity at the same time. So that's a challenge that we're going to face when we kind of approach that. And in terms of, the most positive things that come out of this is, just the foundation that we've built, the rigor we put in, and then the consistency and reliability that we harness from the 3PO perspective. There's not a queue in the 3PAOs. The 3PAOs have been able to come on board. I know that there's, Lee and I are sort of in the top 5 of 3PAOs that have done, 80% of the assessments out
I
here.
believe it's 88% is what the number is.
But with that said, there's areas to improve and the challenges that we spoke about today. I agree, and I'm looking forward to working directly with the PMO, the CSP community to help make the right decisions forward so that we can improve this process. It's not going to be easy. Nothing is. Security is not absolute. It never is going to be absolute. It's almost good enough, right? We almost have to look at it from a good enough perspective because that's ultimately what we're going to face. And so we need to set the litmus and work together to do that. But that's just my opening thoughts to leave.
Yeah, it's growing pains is how I like to put it the best. When I came to Align, we had only done one assessment, and now I think we're over 60. So I've had a part in every one of those assessments basically that we've done. And we don't do the AWSs, we don't do the Microsofts, we don't do a whole lot of that. So we have more one-off smaller customers and clients and CSPs, and those are the ones that we primarily work with. And I think, I've seen those groups struggle more than maybe some of the bigger companies like the AWSs. So FedRAMP has adapted to that and we've had to adapt to that. We don't have access to, a lot of those packages like other 3PAOs do. So it makes it more difficult for us as well. Unless my customer gives it to me, I don't see the CRM, the CIS for Microsoft and Google and some of these AWSs, they're difficult. So they're difficult for me to get, and then that makes my job more difficult. So FedRAMP has helped, that process. They've seen those struggles and they've adapted. And I think there's still some minor growing pains that everyone's going through on the CSP side, the 3PAO side, and the FedRAMP side as well. But everyone at FedRAMP has been more than willing, especially recently with the Rev 5 stuff, to incorporate the 3PAOs. We've set up groups ourselves to talk about how we can offer help and what we can do. And I've spoken to the CSPs as well and engaged their interests, and how we can help them and what their struggles are. So I think we brought all that stuff to the table. And it's helped the process and helped FedRAMP overall.
Any questions for us? Based off of those? I mean, I can keep going if you like.
Yeah.
I know that we had a couple of questions, what's your experience been working with FedRAMP? But, something I heard earlier, I'm glad I listened to it, was the metrics piece. I think the one metric that came to mind is, when is the timing right? Because, think about it from a 3PO perspective. We can either serve as a consultant or an assessor. I don't know, Lee, if your company performs both roles.
Yeah, I'd say we do more assessments than advisory.
And I would say that we do too, but the consulting part is an area that we need to focus on too here. I know we're focused on the 3PO assessments. One of the biggest challenges from a 3PO serving in a consulting capacity is the expectation that they're gonna bring us in and we're gonna make it all up, write the SSP and give it back to them. And that's not a reality. The reality is we need to become part of their team to be able to put the detail into that documentation. And we're not spending enough time sort of thinking about that, I think, from the larger FedRAMP community. What are these consultants doing and how's that working? Well, it's not working very good, because I would say my success rate on the consulting side is much worse than my success rate on the assessment side. Your customers get frustrated with us because we can't wave the magic wand and make those deliverables appear. And they realize that it's much more an investment than they thought, than just from the consulting, bringing the consultants in to make this happen. No, now I need my engineers, all these people, and that's where the costs go up. And they get frustrated, like, oh, we're not even ready for you guys. We need to go back to our team. And, meanwhile, they've expended half of the contract value for the consulting engagement, and they're frustrated, and everybody's frustrated. So I think we need to kind of look at the consulting side and see how we can make improvements there, because that leads into success on the assessment side. Many times we get into an assessment where a 3PAO hasn't performed the consulting, and we go, oh, guys, no, this is a non-starter. Like, you have to go back to go, because you didn't get the right consultation, or you got the wrong sort of consultation to move this path forward. And what I'm tying this back to is the FedRAMP queue. We don't know what that is, right? I think you're number something 50 or 20th in line, or I don't know how they communicate that, but I think that's a metric that's important to understand, to help unclog that, is to allow that to inform the roadmap on the CSP side on when they're ready, because many times I get calls, hey, can we start tomorrow? It's like, we can, but we need to start with a plan. We're not gonna start the assessment tomorrow. We need to come in and learn and understand what's going on. And so that kind of feeds into my first element for this question.
So you had mentioned that there's often a gap between assessment without consultation and assessment after a consultation has happened. Is that because of the lack of clarity or understanding of what the control expectations and deliverables are? What is not being communicated clearly and correctly to the CSPs when they seem to require a consultation rather than to have them do this themselves and then be able to move to assessment?
Yeah, I think the templates is the first part, but it becomes a challenge as we now, and I think it's improved with Red 5. SSP template, I think, is much more easy to roll our existing, from a CSP perspective, our existing policies and processes into. Because there's documentation out there, but it wasn't focused on the FedRAMP framework when they built it, and now they're backing into it. And so it's translating existing policies and procedures into the FedRAMP formats. And that's a lot of time to answer those questions correctly, the implementation statements, writing those up without actually doing a pre-audit. And that's why my most extensive consultations is we're there for the whole ride. And we're actually prepping them for the audit, because we've now taken them full circle with the expectations of what the auditors are going to have. And it's not just, they're coming in blind and say, oh. And so a lot of times we sit sidecar with them to ensure success to the assessment. But if that sort of investment by the CSP isn't made up front, they're gonna get those struggles where it's, okay, now there's these showstoppers, these deemed showstoppers that now we're clogging the FedRAMP pipeline itself because we progressed, we advanced too far without making sure that the road was paved correctly.
There's also the issue with depending on who the advisor was. They may be one of these companies that they can either be a 3PAO or maybe they're not a 3PAO. And they primarily do advisory work. The problem with that is they don't get as much feedback and as much direction as somebody who does primarily all assessments. So we know that FedRAMP has issues with SC20 and SC21, and you have to have DNS set. But an advisory firm that primarily only does that, it takes them so long to do their advisory work that they don't get 10 to 15 assessments a year, so they don't have this feedback. And by the time they do get the feedback, we've changed the process, or that's no longer a heavy hitter item. So there's a barrier there with who's doing the advisory and what is the quality of their work. So this is where I think we play into the knowledge sharing that everyone's talked about with. We need some type of a portal. We need some type, whether we use USDA Connect, whether we have a link on the website, to somehow share this guidance and share the direction out to everyone that needs it. And that's where I don't know how to solve that problem. So the CSPs may need some type of guidance where the 3PAO needs another type of guidance. And do we share the two? Do we just make it a forum for everyone? And I did see that on some of the slides earlier, that this is something that other people have thought about. And I think it's huge to share this guidance. Because it's going to benefit everybody. It's not just, hey, this is going to help a 3PAO, this is going to help a CSP. We got to get the guidance out there, and it needs to be clear, concise, and consistent, as FedRAMP likes to say, for everybody. And that's going to grow the program and put everybody in the right place.
Yeah, Leah agrees with you. I think that the FedRAMP PMO has been more tactical with the 3PAOs than strategic. I think we need to take a step back and be more strategic, and then we get back into the tactical pieces. But I think what you're saying is sort of like a knowledge base.
Yeah,
maybe a 3PAO knowledge base that 3PAOs have access to, and we can decide, does it make sense for the CSPs to also have access to this? But so when those tactical discussions happen, we have a community where we can share and collect feedback from the entire group of 3PAOs, not just the ones that are working with FedRAMP right now.
Any questions?
And
Lewis, GSA, thanks for being here. I have a handful of questions based on your last couple of comments here. So you mentioned that sometimes CSPs who worked with other assessors just at a point in time engagement and not through the whole process, they hit certain showstoppers. Are there any common patterns with showstoppers that you see more often than others that you'd like to share with me?
I think the first one I'd start with is the documentation itself, and specifically the diagramming. That's become a very big emphasis point with the FedRAMP reviews, especially through the RAR process, that I think we need to take a look back at. Yes, the diagram is important, but again, I was having a conversation on the break where at some point you bridge the gap. There's a gap, or there's a collision between intellectual capital and transparency with cloud providers. And that's always been something difficult for us to overcome. Even as 3PAOs, they're like, okay, we'll open it up a little bit to 3PAOs, but don't, NDAs. That's the nature of leveraging commercial cloud providers. This isn't a shared community. There's competition. There's an inherent sense that we need to protect our intellectual property here and not divulge too much as to give somebody a competitive advantage. And, kind of cycling back to, the point, I think we spend a lot of time mulling over diagrams, and it detracts us maybe from the operational processes that support them, which I feel are most important. When it comes down to what's a perfect system, it's not zero vulnerabilities. It's leadership commitment. It's, and let me look at my notes here, because I got a couple other good bullets. Open communication is one, but then there's the challenge between how much communication do we bridge without, bringing our lawyers upset at us or whatnot.
The draft boundary diagram guidance that, I think it's still in draft form, but that's something there that everyone can benefit from if we release that document, get it get it up to the current status of where it needs to be. CSPs just need some direction, basically. That's really what they need to develop their diagrams, whether it's an authorization boundary diagram, a network diagram. They, if you give them the tools, they'll do a good job. It's not that they don't want to do a good job. They just don't have the direction. And if they don't work with an advisor, and sometimes when they do work with an advisor, they get mixed information.
Yeah, I think the large CSPs, obviously the large IaaS platforms have more difficulty with diagramming their environment than the small CSP. That makes sense. Sometimes it's pretty easy to diagram if it's a relatively simple SaaS solution. But once you start getting into the hyperscale clouds, it's like, oh my gosh, like okay, this is going to take us 100 pages to show you. And that's really, comes back to, one area too that I think we need to collaborate a little bit better on is the authorization phase. Sort of the way the authorization phase works now, and I'll speak from an agency sponsor perspective, is the three PAOs working with the agency and the CSP. The agencies sort of sit there, they look at the SAP and they get to see the SAR first. And really that agency signing an ATO is their ticket to enter the FedRAMP process review, which can be dangerous at times because the risk tolerance between FedRAMP and the CSP may differ. And that can become contentious, embarrassing, punitive, as the third party coming to review the package. And sometimes it's 6 months after those decisions, or maybe longer than they've been made. And so now it's like, now we have to recall why we did this. And, there was 6 months of conmon and usually, sponsorship will say, hey, yeah. And I know we're not allowed to put conditional ATOs, but the sponsors can put conditional ATOs. We're gonna authorize this. We want to see 3 months of conmon. It's sort of like a test period to make sure that, and it's usually due to high findings that they didn't, risk reduce or whatever. But what really is important is maybe we need to get the PMO and the sponsorship decision more closely aligned, or an alternative to that is sort of like the RAR does, maybe specify the big rocks or the showstopper areas to make sure that those are checked off. And then, yes, risk tolerance can vary between what the PMO wants to establish and then what the agency is willing to accept. But I keep seeing a pattern of inconsistency there that I think we need to address because of the timing of it. 6 months later, it's very difficult to like, okay, well, yeah, we've had these discussions with the sponsor and they were comfortable with it. Now we're having those same conversations again. Sometimes we don't have the same people that actually worked on the assessment. And so it becomes a very difficult conversation to have, especially when you're asked, what is it? Are you sure? Are you sure? I'm like, that was 6 months ago. I'm pretty damn sure I was sure back then, but now you're asking me, I'm not sure anymore. But,
Any other questions?
Matt, oh, sorry, Bill, go ahead.
Close enough. Bill, SEC, I wanted to drill in a little bit more on where Ann was going, and some of the conversations I think a bunch of us have brought up, specifically around really focusing in on those small businesses. It sounds like between both y'all's companies, it's over 100 assessments at least. I'm not going to put numbers in your mouth, but I'm just making up numbers. So focusing on those small businesses, not the hyperscale. And Leah, you were hitting at this a little bit, mentioning the SC family. Are there specific areas that these small businesses, aside from the diagramming, are there specific families or things that that we really should be focusing our automation or documentation or educational efforts around in specific families or areas that every time you see one of these come through, they're just gonna, they're gonna screw it up, or that there's gonna be a problem with it because you see it over and over again, day in, day out?
SC 100%. I mean, the FIPS validation piece is literally killing every CSP there is. It's just, it's a giant black box that no one truly understands. And then when you start saying that their endpoints have to be FIPS validated, well, their mind's blown. Where does this stop? How far does it go? And there was some direction given on, FIPS, and there's a lot of historical modules right now. Well, that's some more direction that we don't really have, is what's okay and what's not okay. This one's in historical, but they're making progress towards updating it. So can we proceed with that? CSPs are asking us and we're like, well, I got to ask FedRAMP. You may get some mixed responses, but for the most part, it's pretty consistent. But that's a document there that I think, the FedRAMP team could release, and the agencies could even all get together on and say, hey, FedRAMP, this is how we all want to address this, release that guidance, and then CSPs know going in, they don't waste a bunch of money. We don't waste a bunch of money with the assessment. And then when FedRAMP gets the package, they're not wasting their time and money reviewing that assessment. So that's a huge one for me. I don't know about you.
I'll carry on with FIPS has been a bit of a pickle because early adopters got past it. And then it's like, oh, damn, this is a big deal. We need to really pay attention to FIPS. And then we kind of shut the door on it. You must do this. And then now we've sort of come back to, well, there's some risk exceptions around FIPS that we can now make. And so, yeah, that's an area that we really need to put our heads around and get some clear, solid guidance moving forward to that allow folks that maybe were grandfathered, like now in the annual, like you guys need to start working this because this is now, you don't get grandfathered into this anymore. This is the new rule and it's fair. And one of the constant, excuses, not excuses, but responses to FIPS is like, well, FIPS can't keep up with us. This module is years away from getting through the validation process. We're restraining ingenuity and, advancement based off a law that, maybe we need to figure out how to better employ people in our risk acceptance process. And I think that's how we can manage it. But, put some ideas behind how FIPS validation isn't an absolute.
I figured that was gonna be your number one. I think most of us know, but while we're on the topic, not to take up the whole meeting again as I do, but do you have number 2 and number 3 briefly that you add to that list as well?
I would have to say the AC family with a lot of MFA concerns. What is okay, what is not okay, YubiKeys, this could go on. Again, not a whole lot of clear guidance and consistent guidance from, hey, you can use push, but you can't use this. And I know for FedRAMP's perspective, this changes. It changes every day. It changes for us. And every time I get an assessment where I've seen something that I haven't seen, I kind of have to reach out to FedRAMP and say, hey, what's the latest guidance? Is this okay? And if it's not okay, what other methods do we have to use? So, and then, you get into Microsoft, well, they've got multiple different technologies for MFA as well. So, again, this could all go back to that portal that you're gonna give 3 PAOs that says, hey, and it's updated. When something's no longer valid, it goes away. It's not on the list anymore. And you can go to this portal and log in and say, hey, I can use Entra, I can use YubiKey 5. Whatever it may be. So I think that's where it's going to play.
If I had to pick a third one, I would probably come back to the risk exposure table because that's what everybody looks at. Operational requirements, vendor dependencies, risk deviation requests, risk adjustment. That's where the trust gets built or lost. It's like, okay, they've reduced this risk, but what's that telling me? And so I think we need to come back and look at how those things are done, what is a high vulnerability? What keeps it a high vulnerability? Because we're tied to the tools that are, assuming that this is a public facing vulnerability when there's layers of protection down there. And so we kind of need to look at how we handle the deviation requests because those come into play on the annuals. One of the most challenging things as a 3PAO is when another 3PAO did the initial and we're coming back for the annual. And the first thing that is always blows my mind is the continuous monitoring. Where's it been? Like, what? Oh my goodness. Like, are we going to have to do not recommend this CSP? And that becomes a big thing for us. And when we see those things, we need to engage with the PMO and say, hey guys, there's something here we need to look at. Let's get the sponsor involved here. Like a CSP is not, because we talk about the investment that CSPs are making, they make it up front. And then it's continuous monitoring. Once they get their ATO, there's people walk away to other projects. And it's a leadership commitment that I was talking about earlier to make sure that they're continually improving security. Continuous monitoring should be about improving security, not letting security get diluted.
Thank you.
And we do have a virtual question from Daniel. Go ahead, Daniel.
Hi, thanks. one of the things, just in your experience, obviously you work with a lot of different CSPs, at various stages of maturity. And, I think one of the elephants in the room is the PMO queue, right? What do you think is, but in terms of package quality, what are some of the things that you think can be done to help new CSPs get through the process cleaner than they currently do, and what can be done for existing CSPs to make sure that package quality is not a contributing factor to an extended queue?
Yeah, I think I have a good idea.
Go for it, Lee.
So I want to have some type of a quick check system, which they can upload their SSP to, we can upload our SAR to, the RAR, whatever it is, and it does simple validation checks. It's a check mark, a green check mark, you're good. And it runs the FedRAMP set parameters. So if it's supposed to be 15 minutes and you have it to 3 hours, there's a red check mark. You need to fix that before you go to the next stage of validation. This tool could be fairly simple. I know there would have to be some changes to the templates along the way, but it would allow the CSPs to do their own due diligence. They could upload their SSP once it's done, do the checks on it, and they shouldn't engage with a 3PAO until they have that thing all with green check marks. And then the same with our SAR. Once our SAR is done, we upload it, whether it's a tool that's in USDA Connect or whatever it may be. Until we get all the green check marks, that doesn't go to PMO review or the agency's review. Let's not waste their time. If we can't get our part right, there's no sense in wasting anyone else's time. So I think if we could build a system like that, you would cut that queue down to a third. I guarantee it, because I know some of the comments that FedRAMP's getting, that their packages, and it's not by any one person's doing, but there's simple mistakes that should have been caught, and for whatever reason they weren't. So let's automate that process, and let's take the human factor out of that, those simple mistakes.
The review queue is getting clouded with non-security impact related deficiencies or errors.
This is Mike from CSPs. I just had a question around minus the simple things. So like if we got those off the table for you, do you see any interpretation issues in guidance between different reviewers when you're?
Absolutely, and that goes back to the strategic part and building the trust in the 3PAO through more interactions with the PMO. I couldn't tell you if the PMO reviewers, how many FedRAMP assessments they actually worked on. But what they don't get the value of actually performing the audit. Like there is a lot of effort that goes into a 3PAO audit. And that's the beauty of FedRAMP itself that changes from other frameworks. It's not just a checkbox you passed, right? It's a checkbox you passed because we looked at this and we validated that. And it includes all the information in there to hopefully give a reviewer, a CF or a government agency that wants to leverage the package enough to say, yeah, I trust that this was done fully. It's not going to answer every question because it's impossible to repeat. Otherwise, they were actually performing another audit to gain understanding of the system so that answers all their questions. And so I think we need to bridge the gap of what the 3PAO authorization recommendation means and make sure that that's agreed upon by the community. Not only because what it means today is it means it's going to pass FedRAMP PMO's litmus, not the, what the risk tolerance of a particular agency is. And that's when we get into those disconnects where it's like, ooh, should I have maybe, I didn't think of that. But I mean, that's from my perspective.
On a positive note, I will say the reviews that I've been in as of late, the actual reviewer that reviewed a family or a set of families joins the review call with the agency and the CSP, and they go through their comments and talk to them. So it's not, hey, Bill reviewed this family, Cindy reviewed this family. They're actually on the call with us. So if we have questions on their comments, it used to be, well, the person that reviewed that's not here, it was reviewed by. They're on the call now, so they can answer a lot of those comments and those questions and help us update accordingly and get to a positive recommendation.
And to be honest, these are humans. We're humans doing this. The assessor is a human being. They have their interpretation. They have what they've seen before. An experienced assessor has seen controls implemented a myriad of different ways. That was supposed to make some great consultants from seeing how new implementations are done. And it becomes an interpretation. And sometimes you lose that if that individual isn't around to answer the question from the PMO, we've lost that because, you know, they've written it down, but we can't recreate that moment because when we do an assessment, we're sitting with the engineers. Our process is to drive to the evidence we need and capture it then. And so it's a journey. An audit is a journey. It's not anything else. We're leading down to answer that question. I'll go back to, this is good enough. They got it. This passes the control. And then you move on to the next one because there's 400 now, right? And some of them intertwined too. So we could probably work on how we can look at efficiencies across the control families.
Absolutely. Hey, real quick, guys, Bo GSA. I'm curious, have you found a particular set of conditions that would drive one CSP over another to want to go through and develop and build out a gov-only cloud environment vis-a-vis essentially building something into their existing commercial offering? This comes to mind, but
I mean, if they have the ROI, you know, the return on investment, or it makes sense that because they're essentially creating or replicating a commercial cloud just for government. And some CSPs have done that.
Yeah.
Right? Is that your line?
I'd say the reason that I see it is because of the external services requirement, and they have to use FedRAMP authorized services. So they build out a separate environment from their commercial offering strictly because of the additional cost of having to use tools, external services that are FedRAMP authorized. Because if they don't, they get into all kinds of issues which will likely prevent them from getting authorized.
Or employing controls to other commercial entities that don't require the level of rigor, right? And so it becomes, oh, if we put these controls, now we're harnessing and irritating our other non-government communities. So I think that's when it makes the bridge to, we need a government-only cloud. And oh, by the way, there's enough interest in it that we're gonna get the return on investment because they're gonna charge more for it. It's gonna be a government decision. The commercial cloud is cheaper than the government cloud. It always will be.
yeah, I think the impetus is that if it's good for government, it's good for everybody.
Exactly.
Right? And, you know, good security is good security, right?
Yeah.
And if there are a specific set of conditions that are driving decisions to be made around build something unique for government that is separate and distinct from what is the base offering for everybody else. So the external
I
services.
think Lee
you
hit
said,
it right there. That's a important one.
And there's tools out there that everybody knows that are excellent. Jira, for instance, everyone wants to use it, but it's not FedRAMP authorized. So
Can you share some examples? So like, I can imagine that like, if there was an infrastructure as a service provider that was not FedRAMP, that like a CSP was deployed to, then that could lead to this sort of like inference that you need to make a gov version of something. But I think all the infrastructure as a service providers have been FedRAMP to this point. So is there like a specific example right now that you could share about when the external services requirement like recently drove a CSP to sort of fork and make a government version?
yeah, I mean, I could think of a couple, but typically it's not the big services that they need that aren't authorized. It's the smaller sub-services, like everyone wants to use PagerDuty. That was one that we beat to death. But they couldn't use it, or they could use it, but they had to dumb it down to the point where it was absolutely useless to use, where, hey, there's been an incident, log in to look at it. That's basically all you could get out of PagerDuty, which is not what the tool was really designed for, and it doesn't really help anybody. You don't know if this is a serious incident or a false positive or what it may have been. So that's an example. And the Jira one, we used to be able to get away with, they could move Jira into their boundary, so they could use the in-boundary version of Jira. And that was okay. Well, Jira is allegedly stopping support on that, and FedRAMP doesn't really like anyone using it because they know that the support's gonna stop. So you can't use the cloud version because you've got sensitive federal metadata or data going into that, which is leaving your boundary, causing concern, which is 100% valid.
So for those CSPs, it leads companies to like force them to
Re-architect,
do a self-hosted version that increase their maintenance costs and then their security.
or they've got to re-architect their commercial version away from.
It's bringing stuff into boundaries, so it's corporate services too, not just third party. Like, you know, these CSPs have developed all these developer processes and everything else. Their SDLC is reliant on their corporate. And now it's like, oh, how that, then the metadata is what causes the problems. It's like, oh, well, we can't draw the boundary around corporate because we're not gonna pass. So now we have to either, you know, figure out how to handle the metadata that goes into corporate and make sure that there's no sensitive metadata, or we need to actually stand up an instance in our boundary.
Any other questions?
If I may, Jackie, I mean, for DOD, do you guys require CMMC for the set of service providers that you leverage FedRAMP authorizations from?
CMMC is not quite there yet, and so that's really not my area of expertise, but, you know, I don't know how they're gonna handle CMMC relative to FedRAMP, and I think there's the intent early on was reciprocity. But I don't know where it is, but I could get the answer for
That'd
you.
be interesting.
Can I speak on that for just a moment? So, for CMMC, the proposal was released December 26th, Merry Christmas to everyone, happy holidays. But one of the things that was in there is it follows basically what's set in DFAR 7012, which bifurcates. If you're cloud, go do FedRAMP. If you're not, do 171, all the subsequent clauses. That has been true. And that is essentially what the proposed CMMC rule allowed for. So as an external service provider in the context of CMMC, so any of those external service providers handling CUI, if you're a managed service provider, then you have to do 171 and CMMC. But if you're cloud, the requirement for FedRAMP still stands, which is very interesting in the larger context. And I wish I had thought of that when the OMB folks were here, because there's also the FedRAMP equivalency memo that DoD released that basically said, hey, if you're not FedRAMP authorized, you have to be equivalent. But that is a higher bar for a variety of reasons. And it also highlights just the lack of authorization paths that are available to CSPs right now. So
My understanding on CMMC draws a larger boundary than FedRAMP does. FedRAMP is for cloud systems.
Right.
CMMC is for business processes that incorporate cloud systems. So you're drawing a larger boundary. So, you know, the FedRAMP first makes sense because, okay, now if we get FedRAMP on that cloud service, now we can focus on the other elements of this boundary, you know, and we can maybe inherit that piece from the FedRAMP. Now we focus on the business processes that CMMC also encompasses. And so I look at CMMC a little bit different. IAPRE is another emerging framework that's out there. That's more, you know, product list focused, right? You know, so, you know, we have to look at how the scoping draws around these requirements. It's a little bit different for each framework, but they can benefit from each other.
I raise that because, you know, CMMC is really focused on ancillary data, CUI data that would essentially be within the context of an organization's corporate network in furtherance or support of a tech-related element. So, you know, particularly when we're having this boundary scope discussion, there might be an opportunity around, you know, as opposed to saying extend FedRAMP all the way into the corporate innards of an organization, perhaps looking at the interplay between one and the other.
That would be great. If CMMC was operational today, then we could be gaining some efficiencies from those assessments that have been done on the services, because yes, now you're creeping more into the corporate side of the boundaries.
Jackie, one of the things that we're trying to work toward is what is our next year's priorities. And one of them that I took from y'all's discussion was that how do we get FedRAMP guidance out quickly for how it affects the agencies doing authorization, the 3 PAOs and the review process. And so I would be interested, you know, I heard, you know, FIPS is one that's near and dear to my heart. You know, one of the ones that you talked about was operational requirements, deviation requests. And I have to be honest, from an authorizing official, it drives me crazy. I get authorization recommendations that have, I'd like you to accept this operational requirement. There are no mitigations listed. Sometimes they're patches, and never should a patch be an operational requirement unless it really just breaks something, right?
Right.
And so having those standards and things to really tell me how everybody's considering these, I think is critical. So I'd be interested to hear, you know, if you had a top 5 list that FedRAMP could push out quick guidance, you know, and how do we do that in an agile way? You know, what are those things that you see the largest issues around that FedRAMP could assist the whole community with?
Yeah, I think around those, specifically around the deviation request, which includes the risk assessments, operational requirements, vendor dependencies. We need to take a closer look at that because honestly, you're absolutely right. If they spend some more time, they can reduce some of this risk. And what we're faced from a 3PO perspective is, well, is it good enough? Is it gonna pass? You know, we'll address this later. Is this enough to get us our ATO? And so they want to rush. They're rushing to get their ATO so that they can celebrate and start selling their product. And so if we establish some sort of criteria, you know, how I address it personally, when I go into contract with the CSP, I say it doesn't include risk adjust, the deviation requests to get them to fix it. And if they try to do deviation requests, we're gonna charge them more for it. And so that's a tactic that we use to get them to fix it and not try to pass forward unnecessary risk. But I think we can do a better job addressing it as a whole to put some guidance out.
Usually you hear, oh, we'll address it with the agency later. Let's just get through this. That's the typical CSP response. Which we know is not valid.
Coming at a lot of this from a position of ignorance, so that's my caveat.
Okay.
There's a lot of talk this morning about metrics and data. The 3PAOs are a great source of metrics and data around the pre-FedRAMP security state of the potential CSPs and the post and the potential delta that has occurred versus then what comes into the government marketplace. That though puts you in a weird position if the government is going to try to potentially collect them from you with respect to your customers, right?
If we have NDAs with all our customers, right, is so.
Yeah.
How do you anonymize?
Right, could you envision a method to anonymize not just whom the information is about, but also whom is delivering it? So not only do we not know necessarily who the CSP is, we won't know who the 3PAO is as well. So that at least some delta measurements over time could be looked at for, is the program actually improving the security state of the CSPs overall? Does that make sense?
I think that's a responsibility that the 3PO community needs to all get together and meet on and discuss to see what type of relevant metrics can we get and how can we de-identify them to make them useful for the community.
Yeah, I think we could do that.
Like CSPs, I'm curious too, since you have that aggregate view, like, would we be able to get which controls are, you know, coming back to that more often? Right, like which controls are CSPs pushing you on, maybe, right, to try to, and we see failure or we see, you know, cycles that are burning time.
And there's lots of stories and similarities that we can share.
I have checklists that I obviously, you know, as being the quality director, I look at, you know, every report before it goes out. So there's ones that I zone in on more because I know that it's going to be under scrutiny from the FedRAMP reviewers. So, you know, I have a lot of those metrics and I've worked a lot of that stuff for quite a while.
And Lee and I are frenemies, so that, you know, but we are friends.
I think if we can connect that with the GRC tool that's coming up.
Absolutely.
Like, that would, like having that level of visibility, that, because then from CSP's perspective, right, we can start to say, all right, we're, you know, it's AC1, I'll just pick on it. Or, like if it's AC1 that's constantly failing, right, and causing 60% of our failures. Like, we have to go back and look at that across the industry and say, we're approaching this incorrectly.
That's a good exercise to a bottoms up to figure out what do we need more guidance on. So just asking ourselves that question pulls out, these are the areas we need to focus on. So I think it's a
focus on, right, and I'd be more concerned if it was DNSSEC versus the quality of the paper package, as an example, which you mentioned both.
And there's the review reports that FedRAMP uses as well. You know, they have about 40 controls that they really hone in on as those part of those reviews. You know, that would be obviously the best place to start because they've picked up these ones that are typically major failures and they've adapted that list for Rev 5 as well. So
they've almost established their own top 40 critical controls.
Right. Yeah. And everybody, I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think we all look at those ones with the most.
Well, you run the quality, he runs the quality
Yeah,
program.
so
He better know. But yeah, I'm sure my quality program does.
We are scheduled for lunch now, so if you guys can both be brief in your questions.
Please.
How, Jackie Stockworth just said, how are you all, or are you incorporating size of bots and any of the other, emergency directives, into your assessments, for validating, compliance?
Yeah, that's a good question, because, we're probably not doing a good job at it. And we see those come out, and we talk through it with the CSPs, they're like, what does this mean to us? And, it doesn't become a measurable thing, because,
I think there's 1801, which is the spam protection one. That's the one that FedRAMP really harps on and really, that's probably the main one. I think that's looked at the most. Marcy.
The FedRAMP doesn't integrate it into the requirements. So, this is part of this like cyclical. Identify an issue, talk about an issue, and it becomes an issue at the end, but if we put it in the templates, we put it in the documentation, then. But like right now, there's no way for us to validate odds.
Yeah, and so this is a concern from the DoDIG perspective, and I have a finding against me that I have to work with FedRAMP to implement it.
Right.
But isn't that an interesting one? And so, so from my perspective, we clearly have, right now, a lot of significant activity against our cloud infrastructure. And we've issued bods on F5s, and we've issued just Cisco devices, ASAs. And so the question becomes is how do we leverage our 3 PAOs? How do we get guidance out to our CSPs that require compliance and CONMON to answer up to these to make sure that we are compliant? And I just think that in our annual assessments, our initial assessments and our CONMON, we've got to figure out how to address these because they're coming after our infrastructure.
Well, I think you make a good point, and is annual soon enough, right? The next annual assessment, because you could do it that way where it's like, okay, these are the bods that have come out. This is now, we incorporate these, whatever the requirement is to validate that this isn't present into the FedRAMP SAP. And then you get the outcome of those results as part of an appendix, or it's just included in the scope of the test case workbook. But if it's something that needs to be more proactive, like that's like we talked about system, significant change requests. It's like we need to now go back to all of our, if we're assessing any of these customers, now it's basically an all call for me, like, hey, customer base, we all need to come back. And we need to validate this.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in on that. I think that was my question earlier around baseline and change management as well, because I think these sort of huge revisions are good, but we need to be able to manage the next digit, right? The in betweens, and how do we make sure that Marcy's point.
I think we incorporate it into the CONMON program somehow, where it becomes something that okay, this came out this month. That we have to report on this through CONMON, and if you need 3 PO validation on that, then that becomes part of that element and, directive that comes out from that.
And jumping on that, any chatter about requests for software attestations from providers?
Yeah, it's.
So people are starting to think about it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, some of our customers, we attest to so many, and FedRAMP does a great job, and that's one of the pluses of it, is it allows for a lot of attestations for smaller type things, but we need to consider the emerging things, not just the things that have been around.
Yeah. I think, Drew, we're here. This is a discussion point that we've had with both CISA as well as with OMB, particularly associated with M's, BODs, and EDs, and incorporation into the FedRAMP requirement set. Part of the problem is that these BODs, EDs, and M's themselves are not very clear in terms of who it applies to, right? Some requirements are at the system level, some are at the organizational level, some are at the CSP level, and I think within ourselves as a government, having a consistency in terms of applicability is super important. That way, then it creates a direct line path for incorporation of a requirement into a FedRAMP baseline. And I think part of the challenge where you might get one answer one day and another answer another day is because folks just don't know.
Information exchange within the government still remains a problem today. Come on, there's things, you don't get the full story, you get a piece of it.
But the new version of Max will fix all of this.
I think that's also a requirement for the GRC is our the GRC we use today. I can put all of the odds and ends and I can dissect it into the specific actions that our system owners have to have or our cloud service providers have to have. And so that's something we need to think about as we're developing our requirements for our GRC so that I can publish something. It would go out to our cloud service providers. They can actually answer inside of the GRC. It can become part of, validation requirements on, a quarterly basis or an annual assessment, that type of thing. But we've just got to figure out how we incorporate them. And to your point, I always take apart the EDs and the BODs and then say, okay, now what of that is technical and how do what's required here as opposed to from an organizational perspective. And so that's probably guidance we just need to share across the community.
Yeah, Jack, I think there's a lot of synergies between FedRAMP and DISA that we need to realize. I've worked quite a bit on the DISA side in the impact level assessments, where we're either going down that route first or it's the FedRAMP first. I think there's some good things that we can, help each other out in terms of, meeting the expectations for both parties, knowing that going in, rather, we can condense the process and make it better at the same time.
Have you seen CSVs actively using like generative LLMs to facilitate the actual development or creation of their security plan responses?
Not yet.
No, I haven't, honestly.
And
And I'm going to tell you that unless they have a proprietary one that is local to their network, they're not going to because the intellectual property and it becoming a part of a larger model. So if they've got one that's for themselves, they will.
It could work. Otherwise you snip it out pretty quick. But
Yeah.
this is too general. There's no way unless, they don't want to feed their data into that engine, but they have to get their own.
Yeah.
But that's good, right? We can't resist AI. We have to look to see how it can help us.
We do probably need to go ahead and close for lunch, because there's not a lot of restaurants within like super close to the building. So I do want to thank both Jim and me for joining us today. If we do have more questions, are you guys going to be free after lunch? If you guys want to continue this discussion, we can have some more discussion after we break for lunch.
Okay.
Sure.
All right, great. We will be back from lunch at 12. Oh, sorry, it's Gary. Yep.
We got consumers. That's what you want.
And we have been going to they're like, we don't know what we're doing.
They know all. And the first number at the top. Native side.
You get numbers that are all the way across.
I got we're in the middle, right?
I'm cutting down today. So it's like, my back is in the water.
If you could take your seats, we can go ahead and get started. We are recording.
Yeah. I feel like I didn't predict that. When I feel like it came about like performance. But then I started thinking of.
I can't answer the, you're being thought once. You're being thought twice. Welcome back, everybody. Do we want to have Jim and Lee come back to continue our discussion on the 3 PAO? I know, I see Lee, I don't see Jim anymore.
He just stepped out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can. I'm happy to.
Do committee members, do you have any more questions or engagement that you would like?
I just was gonna ask just a follow-on question, particularly relative to the last topic, AI.
Jim, or Lee, if you please come on up and hopefully Jim can join us shortly. Sorry about the tight support.
Oh, no worries. All right.
Sorry to bring you up here.
No, it's fine.
So, curious, we're all like, talking AI at every meeting it seems. And I think one of the consideration points for all FedRAMP that's been brought up in committee meetings previously is, are the current set of FedRAMP controls commensurate with the corresponding set of risks associated with AI services, right?
Yeah.
And I think, some folks say yes, some folks say no. I know NIST is doing a lot of work, particularly around the AI RMAP 2.0 to come up with some corresponding controls. So when you're looking at this, just experientially, right, from a 3PAP perspective, I'm interested in like your views and what you guys are seeing on the ground, particularly when you're engaging in assessments. Like, are the set of controls, are the set of assessment actions, are they sufficiently robust to be able to go through and provide confidence in a FedRAMP authorized AI service? Provides, adequate security using the existing base control set?
Yeah, that's tough. I would say probably 75% of the way there. I don't think there's gonna have to be a huge lot of changes in my perspective. Like the external services, I mean, that's gonna be an issue. So your CA3, SA9 type controls, because there's gonna be a lot of outsourcing of that technology and if how does the first person get authorized and not have external services type of situation, like a chicken before the egg is what I think of. So I think so for that initial AI type CSB, I think they're going to get some special privileges. They're going to be able to get away with some things to build up to the next one and the next one and the next one. So that's kind of how I've thought about it is because this is uncharted waters. There's probably services used in the background for this AI that's not going to have a FedRAMP authorization. And let's be honest, it's going to be processing federal data and metadata, or it could be because you can ask anything. How do you keep from inputting sensitive data and metadata into an AI type of platform?
Have you guys played both an advisory role as well as an assessment role, or?
Primarily, we do assessments. I would say 1 to 2 advisory roles a year. I prefer the assessment side of things just because I feel like we're more accustomed the way we're set up to do that type of work.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions for me?
You had talked about guidance from the PMO around assessments and assessment expectations or evidence that could be helpful. How often do you communicate back with the PMO? And is there like a structured mechanism? You guys have the monthly coffee.
Yeah, so
to have this exchange.
I've been doing this for like 9 years now, so I know all the reviewers. I know I have their cell phone numbers. I can call them and contact them that
But that's
way.
from a personal.
Right,
Yeah.
and that's where we have issues with clear, concise guidance, because what about a new 3PO coming in? They don't have this type of relationship. So it's difficult for them and it's difficult for new assessors coming in as well. So there's obviously info at, you can send a question there. I mean, it used to take 2 to 3 days to get an answer, but they've drastically cut that down. I mean, I usually get an answer same day now, with fairly structured, good guidance. So anytime a CSP wants to see a response, I go to info at, because they're not going to want to see one of my, backdoor conversations with one of the reviewers. They want it coming from a reliable, credible source. So that's kind of where, again, I think this.
Can you get access to other assessors' questions that come in as well?
No, not really. Occasionally they'll post some stuff on the FedRAMP website. I don't know, Marcy, if you remember the name of it, where there's like
tips and cues.
Tips and cues. Yeah, that's what it is. So that is a resource. There's the blog posts. I mean, I think if you put one of those out every Friday, that's even a good start to one of the blog posts to sharing some guidance.
I have a question for you. Have you found that there's, particularly with the Rev 5 transition, kind of like cart before the horse scenarios?
With some of the things, and I think you mentioned it earlier, Red Team, the CAA, there was the requirement put in there and we saw so much panic from that, I can't even explain, and we're still getting it. So now everyone's saying, well, it's only draft guidance, I don't have to do it type of situation. So, and that's what we ran into with the authorization boundary diagram guidance as well. It was never really finalized. It was always in draft. So I don't have to follow that because it's not official. But we all know as 3POs in our relationship that if it comes out in draft, you're expected to follow. So that's kind of an example there. But overall, I thought the Rev 5 transition went very well as compared to the Rev 4 transition. I think it was very well detailed. The website was set up perfect. I was surprised at how little questions I actually had from CSPs on, hey, how do I get to Rev 5? So I think there was a very good job done there.
You mentioned though, I think that the templates had not been updated like for the SSP. So have all of the templates been updated and is everything there to accompany Rev 5 that's needed? For
Yeah,
CSP?
that might have been Jim. As far as I know, everything was good with the templates. We had a hand in helping with some of those as well. FedRAMP, which I love, reached out to us as 3POs and said, hey, what's you guys' thoughts and opinions, and would you help collaborate with us on creating these? And that's what we did. So that was very well done.
Again, I'm the ignorant person in the room. Rev 5, is that the 53 Rev 5 update? Okay.
Yeah, yep.
So going forward in the future, I'm not sure if NIST, and I don't want to speak for them, but we'll be doing like full Rev updates to 53 rather than individual control changes in the catalogs.
Okay.
Going forward. So there is a very real future of control updates absent of full Rev role doing what they want.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
But it also changes the way that change is managed in this situation.
Yeah, we probably have to address that as, hey, is that going to be, here's the guidance during your next annual assessment, you have to review these controls, include them in your documentation type of situation. I think that could work.
Well, I think with everything else that, requirements are going to be emerging, so we need to be able to address them in a more expedient fashion. And maybe annual is soon enough, maybe it's not. So,
Which is why the big Rev roll cycle was not adequate.
Yeah.
but it's just in time to catch up,
Yeah.
right?
Any other questions for you or Jim?
So now that we have more time, I just wanted to drill down more into, Jackie had a question about compliance with CISA, Emergency Directive, Binding Operational Directive. Do you have any specific examples of either issues or pushbacks that you received from CSPs that you ran into, without naming any names, but just specific to a law or emergency directive?
I would say for 1801, we always get well, we don't really manage the email that's being sent on behalf of the government, so we should not be responsible for that DHS bot. But yet they're providing the avenue for it, for the government, so therefore they should be responsible and they should have the technology in place. That's just one. Again, that's the big one that I always run into is, providing the spam protection for sending emails on behalf of the government. If you have any part in that in your cloud service, then you have to abide by that.
You're talking about is that DMARC thing? DMARC?
Yeah, the DMARC, I believe it's 1801. Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, I don't have any specific examples, but I could see it very easily. The CSP challenging us, what's your authority, 3PAO, like we need some teeth behind it before we could enforce that, because we just get questioned.
That's such an interesting example because they're asking, well, hey, why do I own this? If they were doing regular red teaming, they would understand exactly why. They know the piece of it and how. So that kind of brings me back to I think folks were talking about adding red teaming as a control or attesting to having done red teaming. It seems like it emphasizes the importance of making companies develop that capacity.
We're gonna see some interesting results out of red teaming because it's not a 3PO required service. We can validate what the companies are doing. And so the guidance that came out was very timely because we're in this and we needed that supporting guidance because 3PO is always questioned on the rigor that we're taking things and how we're interpreting it. And if we don't have that guidance to point to behind it, we get pushed around and bullied in that sense.
And that was a comment I left on the red team, the draft that was out there is. There needs to be some type of a structure to it, otherwise you're gonna have people underselling the red team exercise just to satisfy where. You know, a non-3PA may be doing that for a $5,000 exercise, well, there's no guidance to telling them that that's not sufficient. Whereas as a 3PO, we probably have a little more idea of what should be in it, we may sell it as a $50,000 engagement. Well, that's a huge difference there, and then when I come in to do the assessment. I'm on the hook to validate that red team exercise that said company did for a very low price that. How can I prove whether it was sufficient or not? But yet I have to sign off on.
This harkens back to the first days where a web scan was rendered as a pen test. Right?
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
You really need to go through and define some of the rules of the road or some of the basic guidelines around what constitutes a red team.
Absolutely. I mean, I like to leave things open and, you know, have ingenuity, but at the same sense, if you're just, there's people out there that just want to check the box, they don't care about security. Unfortunately, that's where we are. And that's what scares me.
The controls assessment isn't so much, but when you get into red teaming, penetration testing in general, it's not about when we're done. It's about, did we run out of time, right? Because the pen testers never want to stop. You know, they constantly dig and then, but they have to pull back at some point and say, all right, this is what we got. And then they pick up next year, right? So it's, and that's a benefit of, you know, continuing, you know, consistent 3PAOs is you bring back to people, we take our lessons learned and apply it. And the penetration testing exercises are really the most valuable in terms of identifying things that you don't know. And that could be the next thing that gets, you know, you a headline, right? That's, we find some critical and valuable information to correct system security within those engagements, as opposed to the control assessment, which relies on an operational process that it was carried out. It was documented, right? It should have been followed, but somebody didn't.
Just to your point, I really think that that's part of this guidance that we need to look at, because I've been getting lately. Well, the pen test said it was external and it didn't have this and it didn't have that, and I'm thinking, you know, shouldn't this be an internal pen test? Should we not assume breach? You know, should we be looking for, you know, places for lateral movement? And if we start from the outside with nothing, you're gonna get nothing. And, you know, and so I think we do need guidance on what the 3PAOs should be executing as, and whether different 3PAOs do something different, you know, I don't know, but it's an interesting question, and what I see really varies vastly depending on which 3PAO actually does the test.
Yeah, but there's gonna be a disparity between, because we develop our own methodology.
Yeah.
And I would like to remind the committee that we only are going to 255 today, so we have just about an hour left to do our deliberations and discuss what we would like to work on for the upcoming year. We can keep going with Lee and Jim if you prefer, or we can move into the deliberations.
Can I make one more comment? I'm gonna go over to Bronco to your question to them, which was on the side of the box. And it sounded like from what you all indicated, the only one y'all actually really look at is the 1801.
That's fair for me at least.
Yeah, and so, you know, that's where I think we need to get guidance out and how we actually address current FODs and current activities and emerging requirements. And, you know, just tell Marcy, yes, it does the AO who issued the authorization to cloud providers, is it their responsibility to go out? Is it FedRAMP to all the cloud providers on the marketplace? You know, how do we track the compliance? You know, so I think that's an area we really need to wrap our arms around with APTs out there. It is really significant issue to get after with our cloud providers. They're part of our infrastructure, part of our day-to-day business now. And we really need to make sure they're taking care of emerging requirements.
Right.
They don't necessarily have the information about the threats that we do. And we just need to get that stuff out.
And I agree, and then again, we worked with FedRAMP in the past to provide some guidance, but clearly we need more. And I need to comment that my question was somewhat loaded. There's also a question of authorities, because obviously our directives, we only have authorities over federal civilian executive branch. We can't direct cloud providers what to do. And then there's also applicability. Unfortunately, we can't. And then there's the applicability issue, where BODs and emergency directives apply to federal information systems only. And then where's that boundary, how that works? That's not an easy, that's a not clear, straightforward answer, but we definitely need to work.
That tracks with how it's viewed and the resistance that we receive.
And again, being someone who co-authored most of those directives, I've been intimately involved, not just in developing them, but also working on the deployment side and working with both agencies. So it's not an easy answer.
Yeah, because we, obviously, you guys have the same thing, as we have a vulnerability disclosure program, right? And so we have, friendly hackers that attempt to compromise our public facing websites. And so those are directive actions too, that we're actually penetrating the cloud providers. And the hackers report in the vulnerabilities that they find, and we are tracking those to closure, and there's no question of authority, so, in this whole space, we've really got to figure out that we're partners and how we approach securing all of our infrastructure.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, there's probably two nuances too. One is from a cloud service provider's infrastructure specifically, right? Is that's where we're focused mostly. And then there's your actual mission workloads running on our infrastructure. So you're gonna have like a kind of a bifurcation there. The other one is how fast, like what's your, what of this vulnerability, how fast we get to remediate is gonna be a big question. Similar to like the FedRAMP ones, like 30, 60, 90, or are we looking at like a year?
That's what I'm gonna say with APTs, it's today. And that's the one I'm really concerned about, is more than the CPEs that we're picking up on stands. It's we have an immediate threat and we need to close this gap. And so it really is about the mission systems, and we tackle that side even in the cloud hosted, but also those that are on the cloud infrastructure side of the house.
Yeah, I think there's a lot we can do this year.
Yeah.
What a good transition.
Thank you both for your insight today. Yes, thank you so much. All right, I would like to now invite the committee to begin their discussion and deliberation to determine the next priority or priorities you would like to work on. If you're ready today to vote, we can also do that. One more note, if the committee cannot decide what they would like to work on this year or feels that they need additional presentations or information to proceed, we can still hold a vote today, but the vote can be, for example, to delay determining the committee's next priorities until the next steps are achieved. Are there any questions? All right, great. As always, please remember to restate your name prior to speaking to ensure that those on the webcast and the people reading the minutes will know who is making what comment. With that, I will now open the floor to members to deliberate what they believe is the most important priority the committee should be working on. Anne, would you like to start us off with your thoughts?
Thanks, Michelle. I just wanted to say thank you to all of our speakers and presenters today for sharing a lot of great information and teeing up a lot of great discussions. Based on these presentations and what I've heard from the group so far, I think there are a couple of priorities this committee could consider, and of course, we're open to whatever the committee comes up with here, but just to get the discussion started, it seems like one big theme is how can we help FedRAMP solve challenges around barrier to entry, specifically for small businesses? So we've heard about cost, authorization timelines, just the asks made of small businesses at different levels of maturity. That could be a whole category. We could also talk more about the discussion we just had about what are some ways to grow and activate the 3PO marketplace. So we've heard from some 3POs. You all have had experiences working with 3POs. We know that the marketplace is about 40 companies, 10 of which handle about 80% of the business. We know that the ecosystem, especially for SaaS products, is growing and growing. And so the FedRAMP program is going to be scaling up in a variety of ways to meet the demand from the marketplace and also agency needs. How, if any way, does the 3PO ecosystem need to evolve? And are there ways the FedRAMP program can be more directly supporting them, strategically engaging with them, as folks have mentioned? So it's a second priority area. A third priority area that's come up a lot is doing a deep dive into reciprocity between FedRAMP and commercial security frameworks, potentially also between agencies, combination of these. And if there are specific types of companies or authorization levels that would benefit from prototyping reciprocity frameworks, for example. And a fourth area that's come up is, should the FedRAMP team evaluate privacy requirements specific to generative AI and other emerging technologies? Bo brought up a couple examples. We've talked about this a little bit. The space is moving very quickly here, so I think this conversation will be less about specific point in time benchmarks and more about how do we evolve our government and FedRAMP idea of a threat model to accommodate the idea of how generative AI, large language models, other kinds of emerging technologies affect how we think about data privacy and security boundaries. So I think any of these areas are probably meaty enough for us to spend a lot of meaningful time on. Maybe there's a combination of them that resonates with this group. Maybe there are other priority areas as well. I think we saw from the last year's worth of engagement that we were able to tackle some substantial topics and provide feedback that was meaningful and actionable to the FedRAMP team. So I think we have the opportunity to do that again, but also learning from the prioritization conversations we've had in the past. I think we do need to focus to be able to make the best use of this committee's time. So can get into more details here, but I just love to just pause there and hear whether any of those areas or a combination thereof or other areas are resonating with this group as priorities.
If you don't mind me starting, so some of these areas, I'm not sure they should be our priorities, they should be the drivers behind what we do. But there's an S in FSCAC for security, and I think security should be our priority. And again, this comes from the agency I work for. And also that's one of the priorities for FedRAMP security of cloud offerings. So I think that needs to be our focus. So as we think about potential priorities, I just want us to refocus and think about security with response.
I obviously come at it more from A, so I understand. The one thing I wanted to point out relative to security is like, there's security for the things we buy, which of course is not my lane, and I obviously agree with everything you're saying. I think there's also modernizing unsecure old things that also has a security, which is less about, meaning there's still some balance towards like the perfectly secure product that you buy and something better than what you have. And it's very challenging for agencies that are kind of asked to do both things. It's a balance, is my point. And I think it should be the focus, it is the focus of this is security, but that we look at the process by which we bring those new things in and the timeline for those things and how insecure something may be while that's going on, balanced out with just like very specific 853 controls and all of that stuff. And I think they're both security focuses, I guess my point. I would argue that A, to some extent feeds into a security discussion as well, at least from the agency. My perspective would be that doing both is maybe.
And I think A supports everything we do. We definitely, everything with security in mind, we have to make sure that we don't create barriers for entry and obviously.
FedRAMP just has a cost to it that it makes that much harder, both from a budgetary standpoint for me who has to pay for it and then to talk a vendor into actually go.
And there's supply chain risk, as we've seen with the consolidation of many small companies into a few large companies over the last, 10 years. So anyway, valid points. Bill and then Mike.
I also have security in my agency's name. But my perspective is a little different on this one. I concur with the obviously small businesses is huge for me. And I think that is the key. I mean, small businesses is a way that the hackers can get in. That is a clear thing. That being said, I feel like a lot of the discussion we've had around small business, a lot of those levers that we are concerned about might not necessarily be in the FedRAMP box. And a lot of that seems to be in some of the other boxes, not to put SBA on the spot or OB on the spot. But I think there's a lot of other things in there that go into it. I'm much more concerned personally. I'm in a small agency now, so my concerns have shifted pretty much 180 from where they used to be. And when we're looking at towards D and broadening to the conversation we're having about the BODs, my biggest concern at the end of the day, sitting in a small agency, is I got all this stuff. OMB's throwing all these unfunded mandates at me. I don't have the resources to keep up with this. And we need a government-wide approach to dealing with these with all of the vendors. So that is my pain point day in, day out, is how are we dealing with all these requirements? So I would broaden D away from just the privacy specific requirements to AI. I mean, everything that's in that new AI memo that just dropped last night, I think that all of those areas are things that to be looking at, as well as the BODs, as well as all of these other requirements that are coming out, and think about broadening the program. And I understand that there's a 180-degree difference from what I said a year ago on this topic, that we should only be focusing on the 853 stuff. This is where my pain lives personally.
A D instead of a T, dog.
We're worried about bots too.
Bots are a problem. It's a kind of on my side.
Thank you. Sorry, what does BOD mean?
Finding operations FedRAMP.
So maybe it's a different line. I mean, it's an important thing to be focusing on, but
Well,
it's not the same as AI.
Yeah, I'm proposing a modification to D. It could be a D part D or part one or whatever, but basically saying like, we should consider the variety of other requirements that have been introduced, that are current and ongoing and persistent, of which, privacy requirements of AI is.
I think, right. Please.
Well, we have Daniel. All right, Daniel.
Okay.
Oh, Michelle, did you want to call him? Well, I thought we had, like first.
So I just have two quick things. One, I think we need monitoring of the 2023 initiatives and landing of those. So everything that we had in 2023, we want to actually follow through on. And then the second piece that I wanted to just hit on is it's just out of my head. So I'll let Daniel go, so it'll come.
Daniel, go ahead.
Thanks all. Daniel Payne, Databricks. Again, I think I agree with all the points that are being made here. It'd be really hard to argue against any of the lettered points that are up here. I think my one concern is that, you know, when I came on board a year ago, I was, you know, kind of quiet and trying to listen in and see, you know, what everyone was thinking. And as we move through the initiatives, I still feel like we have a lot of the same problems that we're not quite addressing. You know, PMOQ, lack of clarity with FedRAMP requirements, lack of cohesion between agency review teams and PMO interpretations and you know, CSP interpretations, lack of volunteer agencies for sponsorships, and as someone mentioned, the resources for the day-to-day things. And then, you know, there's the emerging technologies. Some of these are kind of baseline issues that I think we've all seen and heard and dealt with. But until we kind of see what the PMO has to roll out, I still feel that a lot of those, you know, baseline activities and issues are still there. And I'm not sure that any of our current initiatives are sort of hitting on that. So those are kind of my areas, I think, that I'd like to tackle as you know, someone who's on the CSP side now and who has been on the audit side before and on the agency side as well. You know, a lot of these baseline issues are you know, the main cause, and some of the symptoms that we're trying to fix are going to be, you know, the whack-a-mole kind of things. So I guess that's my main concern, that we're kind of straying from what are the problems that FedRAMP currently has. And obviously we can move into future activities and future goals and you know, future technologies, and that's all well and good, but I'm still trying to think of the little agencies that are, you know, struggling, they don't have resources, they still don't get this kind of stuff. And, you know, we're all kind of breaking the sound barrier into the next wave of things to do, but I'm still trying to be cognizant of, you know, who's really struggling with the processes.
Daniel, I fully agree. That's exactly what I was talking about with like the landing and monitoring of our 2023 initiatives. Like, we have to make sure that all of those things land because they're kind of the table stakes for making sure that this is a successful program across the board. And then the other thing that I think we still need to focus on, or we should at least focus on, is just like cost reductions overall, both labor as well as financial. So making sure that we're keeping that in mind as the committee, and making sure we're focused on how do we continue to remove, you know, cost, drive down efficiencies, find those really low hanging fruits that are hanging out there for us. And driving those out of the system, right? And then we can start to really focus on how do we then improve it and catapult from that position.
Jackie?
Jackie Snodgrass, item C, I believe, is already on the roadmap, so I would probably remove this from our focus, because I think it already is a priority. And the other one that I'd like to see added, this kind of goes along with the landing of the 2023 initiatives, is the implications from the OMB memo on FedRAMP. I think there's a lot of churn right now. I have churn just from specific little section of it, but I don't know what it means that the JAB's not doing authorizations anymore. Do people know that the CSPs are churning out? They're going, well, what's happening there? Who's gonna do ConMon? How are we moving forward with these multi-agency things? You know, if the JAB wasn't effective, you know, it turning out stuff, how are we going to just join up, you know, this agency and this agency to do something? What does it mean to reach out to an agency for process improvement? So I think that to me, it really, I don't know, we heard this morning a lot of their roadmap, right? But I didn't know how they're going to implement a lot of the requirements and where that is going. So me, from a labor perspective, currently supporting the JAB that doesn't exist anymore, what does that mean? You know, and what do, you know, what are my cost figures gonna be? What do I have to adjust? And so it's not just the cloud providers, it's gonna affect the 3 PAOs, it's gonna affect the entire workforce, and I'm not sure how that actually gets announced or codified. And so that to me is a real immediate concern, because essentially when something comes out in draft, FedRAMP today reacts. And so certain actions have been taken, but do people clearly know what those mean to them and their workspace?
Can I add on to that too? I think that Marcy or Shulman, I think that's really important because, you know, we've heard today just from folks in the room about no one really wants to be the agency sponsor because there's a labor and there's all of the time and hours that goes into that. But if JAB's not authorizing and we don't have the new program authorization, that's the only path right now. And so we're going to be at this point where there are no new, there are very few ways to get authorized. And so we're continuing to build and create additional bottlenecks. So like the additional authorization paths that were outlined in the memo, we didn't spend much time on that this morning, but with the OMB folks, but I think that should, I don't know how that affects us, but I think that should be a point of concern because it's going to affect the overall number of authorizations.
I think that's a really good point, and it's table stakes, and I don't know if this is allowed, you can tell me if it's not, but can we ask the FedRAMP folks who are in the room to respond to that? Because I know that there is a communication plan that is happening, but in terms of is there anything that you guys would like to say that would address some of the concerns here about how does the post-JAB world actually gonna work?
We can't do that, but if you please come up so the L can hear you.
It's okay if you're standing in front of the.
Okay, just you have to be close enough to pick up the mic.
So the PMO authorization is absolutely something we want to do and deliver on. A lot of those prioritized activities you're seeing are really making sure we're building the capacity. So as we take on this new work, we're able to execute that efficiently. So that's one of the reasons why you're not seeing it as immediate on the roadmap, but it is something that is a priority because it's important to build the marketplace and fill in potential gaps in the marketplace as well.
So this is Jackie. So does that mean the PMO is almost as an agency, you're going to issue authorizations with just you, or are you going to partner, or how does that work? Or do you know? You may not know.
I think the final OMB memo is gonna probably determine what that looks like and how PMO authorization is used. I think there's certainly a prioritization element filling things in the marketplace. CSPs also need services as well, so there could be other demand signals we would look at and evaluate when that type of authorization will be issued.
Mike, just a quick question on the JAB sunsetting. Is that going to happen prior to this setup, or is like, is there a planned gap? What's happening now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's already sunset.
It has, the JAB has really sunsetted at this point, as it will not be, you know, convening again as the JAB. The next thing I think you'll likely see is, you know, really more on OMB to speak to this in detail, right? But will be the assembly of the FedRAMP board. And some of some of the threads that I see in this discussion are also, you know, that's what I think you will likely see those bodies taking it'll be some of their first real things they have to sort through, right? There is a limit to what GSA and the program can say definitively about how agencies are being organized and how their work will be performed. But that is definitely, we've been observing it as a pretty active line of work on that part.
Just a quick follow-up on that one. Do we know who owns that roadmap, and can we get that roadmap presented at our next meeting? And that might be a more general question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is likely, should be something that we channel towards OMB and to the board once it's brought together.
So, I mean, it sounds like we're reducing the pathways to authorization in current state to get to a broader state later. Like JAB is not giving any initial authorizations right now. There's no additional PATOs being granted by JAB. So it's agency or nothing. Current state. Is that right?
I mean, I think right now, I mean, there are, in terms of what's being actioned, I think right now agency authorizations are the ones that are the most active for the reasons that we just described. But you know, what I think folks are trying to bring together here from both sides are more pathways than existed before. I think folks are noting the pain of the transition.
So and would that be something that you could take up as like an action for next meeting to see who owns this?
Yeah, I think you're drawing out an important point, which is that during the transition, we're gonna see a dip in authorizations and pent-up demand. And then as the FedRAMP PMO wraps up its capacity to do authorizations, there'll be, you know, it'll be an uncomfortable transition. So I think we could certainly get more information on the communication plan, the timeline, and the roadmap for that, and also communicate the concerns you've just articulated here in this room to OMB, so that we're all aware that that we're entering into a state where there'll be some negative impacts before there's long-term positive impacts. So we should just be clear and transparent about that as much as we can, and OMB, GSA, et cetera, should be able to communicate to this group effectively about what to expect.
You got it, be on the phone.
Hi, OMB.
Hi, this is Carol Bells. I just want to add that, you know, because OMB is in the process of establishing the FedRAMP board. I wasn't on the call this morning. I'm sure Drew probably mentioned that maybe. So, and as far as the concerns about authorizations and the board doing authorizations, there would be nothing stopping the new board from doing authorizations. It is in the statute that they can perform authorizations, but we are wanting to rely more on the agencies, more so than we've done in the past, just because of the vast number of cloud service offerings that are out there, and we need to dramatically increase the number of products and services that are in the marketplace. So that's why we're just looking at all of the different options for how we may be able to increase capacity.
Carol, does OMB currently have in the materials it plans to communicate the future understanding or estimation of the volume of authorizations that would be affected by the transition, and what our goals would be around either preserving the volume of authorizations or increasing? Because it stating that we want agencies to do more authorizations, that's an intention. We could also aggressively bring agencies to the table and say, we've got 150 pending authorizations, who's going to pick them up? You know, so I think what we're there's some anxiety in the room right now that I'm sure we can resolve with communication around what do we do for folks who are waiting now and how long realistically should they wait and what proactive actions can they take to accommodate the transition that you're planning to roll out?
I think like that's like I mentioned, we're in the process of standing up the FedRAMP board. So I think that's that board that's going to kind of define what those next steps are. So I know that the JAB was working to, finalize everything that was in the process currently, get those authorizations signed, and added into the marketplace. And then everything new will kind of fall under the new FedRAMP board and what plans that they'll have in place with respect to the authorizations and the priorities.
Gotcha. For folks who are waiting now, is there any specific guidance you'd give them on continue to wait until you hear specific next steps from us? Or is there anything you'd like the audience to proactively consider and start doing?
Okay, so are you referring to maybe someone who's already started the process? Because, I believe, if they've actually already started the process, the intent would be to, continue with that and completing the authorization.
Are there specific use cases that folks that were speaking of earlier would like to flag for Carol?
Yeah, I mean, I'm worried about the FedRAMP queue of current accreditations that are in process.
So in queue, but not yet assigned to an agency or?
Potentially at any stage. I mean, just anything that's gone out from the through PAO and from the CSP to the JAB for sign off.
And it looks like there's 13 cloud service providers that are in the FedRAMP JAB queue with either a status of FedRAMP ready or FedRAMP in process, including one Google GCVP. You're probably thinking about.
I think you brought it, but yes. Okay, I'll take that.
And
I'll take that as.
And if we're pushing the onus to the agencies, what support are they getting to sponsor packages if that is going in the near term going to be the only option effectively?
And if I could just add a point that Bill made before, I wouldn't assume that just because we're a larger agency, that we have any less the budget. We're also responsible for a lot of things. And it should definitely not be assumed that we would have additional, like we're all our budgets are getting cut in the next couple of years. So that's gonna be a big challenge if that, and communication, I think would be very helpful there, but resources would probably as well.
Just to say the obvious thing, yeah, I mean, I don't know who's read all the appropriations already, but the numbers don't go up this year. It's pretty astonishing. Most of us took cuts or flat. The notion that agencies will suddenly be able to pick up all of this work that the JAB didn't have time to do, I find a little confusing and astonishing.
I'd say things like there's other.
Yeah, and I think like what we're trying to do with the new policy is to kind of add additional flexibility and to provide for additional options for authorizations. So for example, historically, the JAB had been performing joint authorizations. There's nothing stopping maybe the agencies, the different agencies beyond those historical JAB agencies from kind of getting together and conducting joint authorizations. So we're just trying to look at all the various ways that we can kind of expand what we're currently doing in order to help increase the number of solutions that are entered into the FedRAMP marketplace. So.
Yeah, thanks for that, Carol. I think that this group perceives there to be barriers to agencies stepping in and doing more of this work. And one of them, as a few folks have mentioned, is budget. I think what I heard quoted from maybe Jackie or others last time we met in person was that there's an upfront cost to agencies to performing the initial authorization that's in the order of magnitude of small digit millions, depending on the size of the cloud service provider. And then going forward indefinitely, there's a maintenance cost of about, what was it,
1.3 million for every
1.3 million.
20 cloud providers that we're doing continuous monitoring for.
1.3 million for every 20 cloud providers. So it's not nothing. It's part of the budget planning that CIOs and CISO shops have to do. So, and I think also I'm reading in this situation, there's not necessarily, agencies are not necessarily hearing a call to like raise your hand and help out with the 13 people in the queue, plus the 25 who are in unfunded ConMon status or whatever. So I think it would be helpful that if the total set of cloud service providers who are going to be affected by the transition is something like 30 or 40. I think it could be helpful for FedRAMP and OMB to sit down and make that spreadsheet of 40 and come up with a communication plan that not only communicates to people who are waiting what to expect cloud service providers, what to expect, but also does some rabble rousing with agencies and trying to understand who can step up and start engaging in this way. And then try to understand what are the barriers or what are the incentives that are needed to get agencies to the table on this, on some kind of a timeline.
If I could just, from my perspective, just to make sure that everybody level set, is that from a JAB authorization perspective, and maybe this is where you guys can answer this question, is we stopped doing JAB authorizations in the December timeframe. So that was 3.5 months ago.
You're saying
The three TRs, DHS, GSA, and DOD, as members of the JAB, the technical representatives. They're still doing the CONMON on the JAB authorizations. But if we have 13 in queue and some in process, who is actually doing that, or who's doing the in-process work today? Is that just the PMO? Because we're not doing that anymore.
We are working with the current providers who are in the queue, and the goal, making sure they manage the complete authorization process.
Yeah, and more broadly are tied with OMB and in understanding which of these may be good candidates for joint authorizations, which may be good candidates for PMO authorizations. We are, our commitment is to not leave the folks who are in the queue today stuck there. There's a few ways that we could do that. It is definitely still an in-process thing. That, is a multi-stakeholder process, but that is the goal.
Okay, Daniel has a question virtually. Daniel, go ahead.
Yes, no, I think it's just a comment to something I heard before. I think, part of the incentive is obviously being able to use the product, but a lot of there's already been agency liaisons that have been identified from, I think, every agency, and that was an initiative that happened, a couple of years ago. So there should be at least one representative at every agency that has, a dog in the fight, so to speak, to getting cloud services through the process. I think that in combination with some sort of, FedRAMP Sherpa program or having people at the table here. I know obviously no one wants to necessarily, raise their hand and do that, but, having the people who do things really well, help those folks that don't have the resources. And if everyone puts a person in the mix, you only need 4 to 5 people maybe to do a bunch of assessments. So I think I'd like to see that incorporated in some way with the liaison program that's kind of already in existence.
Okay, so it sounds like the FedRAMP team has a plan, the plan is in process. We will all be hearing more about the plan as it's developed.
Yeah. I think the barriers for one is right, but the barriers shouldn't be specific. I think what we're hearing right now is that the barriers are not just specific to small business. There are barriers for, retailers in terms of expanding the market that aligns with the other priorities. And then there's barriers for small agencies as well as larger agencies, particularly in terms of stepping up to facilitate agency sponsorships. One thing I should add, to Carol's point, we've engaged with OMB, VA, HHS, CMS, to really look at exploring this joint agency authorization concept. Between our respective agencies have similar cloud stacks, if you will, and similar approaches to development, just to see if there is a set of cloud service providers with respect to our agencies where, there might be a sharing of that workload to facilitate either a joint authorization between the respective agencies, or perhaps to go through and say, in the aggregate, this triumvirate, if you will, might have maybe a dozen cloud service providers that are of need. And individually, we work to develop a common rubric, common set of principles in terms of showstoppers that might preclude an authorization, and then divvy up the work with respect to our agencies, just to be able to leverage one another, including our existing resources, to be able to get further, better together. And so I think there are some things that are happening, particularly around exploring this joint agency authorization concept that is going to be helpful, but it will take some time, certainly.
Thank you. So the richness of that discussion suggests OMB memo is a topic that could be a major priority. In the time that we have, are there other priorities that are coming to the forefront? And I also just wanted to say, I've heard the feedback here that we need to make sure that our 2023 initiatives also are carried through. That's going to be happening. The FedRAMP team is actively working on that, but I agree that we should continue to get updates and provide feedback. I also agree that a lot of the things that are in that list are table stakes, but want to encourage us to think iteratively about engaging with feedback for the FedRAMP team. That work's going to be ongoing, but it's not like they're starting the process of doing that work. We'll work in a, on it without any outside input or feedback. And then we'll be done at a certain point. They're going to work iteratively. They're going to communicate their progress iteratively. And so there'll be multiple checkpoints that we and other stakeholders can use to provide feedback. So I think there are ways to hold the line on those things being table stakes and also provide feedback. And I think there's a risk of us, if we just say we're just going to monitor what we told them to do last year, that we'll miss, that the industry will move out from under us when it comes to things like emerging technology, generative AI, large language models, et cetera. So I just want to encourage us to consider additional priorities interleaved into discussions about monitoring against the table stakes goals we identified last year.
We have a virtual hand raise from Lamont. Lamont, go ahead.
Hi, Lamont Yarborough, HHS. Agree with many of the points. One additional one that I might offer, just based upon the feedback I get, the variety of discussions I have within my CISO council. Of course, we can all appreciate, the diversion paths that you can start and finish through the FedRAMP certification process, right? And you can do a number of things to kind of accelerate that process. But even if you can take advantage of things that accelerates that process, you're still looking at roughly a 12 to 18 month window. So I think I would just offer, if there's anything we could even do to consider that, would even expedite, that certification process, because the longer things are in the pipeline, it becomes a resource load, whether you're the vendor trying to get in, whether you're on the federal side trying to reconcile this work. The longer it's in the queue, the more resources it takes. And I would just simply offer, to the extent that we can kind of discern ways in which we can even reduce that timeline, would be of great benefit.
The feedback. All right, we've got Jackie and then Bo.
Jackie Snoffertis. So one of the things I kept hearing was we need an agile methodology to publish guidance to address community needs, whether that's through POs, authorizing agencies. Examples we had were POAMs and operational requirements and FIPS and those types of things.
Listening to OMB earlier, Drew made three points. One was the barriers to entry for small business, which we expanded in A to cover other stakeholders. The other two that he mentioned was the cost of FedRAMP. I think making sure that we're receptive to what OMB is thinking is important. And then third was really around metrics, to be able to track utility and effectiveness relative to, I think, outcomes. I had a couple other ones that I was thinking about. For D, when we're talking about binding operational directives and emerging tech like AI, I don't think it's just exclusive to bots. I think it's really more a matter of policy transparency, right? Particularly around EOs, Ms, bots, EDs, you name it, particularly relative to how they impact CSPs through the FedRAMP baseline. So ensuring that we have a consistent approach to applicability to drive implementation, I think is important.
I think those two are related
They are.
to the guidance mechanisms.
Yeah. Fair. And just a couple others. I think, when we were hearing our friends from the 3POW organization, they're talking about some barriers or challenges that they were commonly experiencing. There was mention of boundary scope guidance. There was mention of FIPS validation. I think this group could potentially be helpful if we tackle that issue head on. In terms of providing a common voice through the FSCAC, in terms of, approach to validating crypto, not to replace NIST, not to replace OMB, but just to add a voice that reflects both industry, agencies, as well as 3 PAVs. In terms of boundary guidance, FIPS validation, third-party integrations, API security, you name it, the list can go on, but just prioritizing on the highest set of risk areas that tend to preclude authorizations or prolong authorization decisions. And then one last one that I was thinking, we mentioned agile, like agile authorizations. Right, that might be something for small business in particular, where, looking at approaches other than a monolith that is a FedRAMP ATO that takes 12 months, 18 months, is there a step in between where we can issue an initial authorization to allow onboarding to realize some monetary gain, to be able to eventually go through and achieve that ultimate FedRAMP authorization down the line? And then one thing that we're doing at GSA that I think is important, we're engaged in, C-Scrum, vendor risk monitoring, leveraging, industry tool sets, cloud-related tool sets that really focus on identifying vendor risk, supply chain risk, organizational risks, particularly around where our vendor solutions are domiciled, leadership, financing, C-Scrum, cyber hygiene at an organizational level. And it's been impactful, at least relative to our usage of GSA. And it's not corresponding to anything within the FedRAMP baseline. That might be an opportunity set. And ideally, perhaps a shared service through CISA.
That was about 100 interesting ideas. I'm trying to distill down, if you don't, go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, pivoting on that, I think each one of these has a metric element to it.
Right.
And so, A through G. And then Branko said something that triggers something in my head that I'll come back to it.
Okay, well, feel free to interrupt if it comes back to you. So I'm gonna try and distill down some of what we just discussed into priority areas. So Drew from OLB mentioned the need for metrics. We've also been bringing up the idea of metrics and just trying to figure out how can we track meaningful progress towards existing goals, new goals. I wonder if metrics by itself, like what are some meaningful metrics to recommend to the FedRAMP team that incentivize the right kinds of prioritization actions from that team? That could be an area here. And then within that, we could potentially discuss things like, are there SLAs for different steps or different, methodologies that would encourage things like agile practices brought into the authorization process? I know the FedRAMP team is already, based on their roadmap, looking into agile iterative ways of handling significant change requests, but we could prioritize that within the context of a conversation about metrics. So that's one. Yeah, the idea of a knowledge base that's contributed to by a variety of different stakeholder groups in an incrementally updated way with some ownership, making sure that all the content is evergreen, up to date, something a few of you brought up. So knowledge base could be another one. Policy, the impact of policy on everything here in terms of like what we're trying to get cloud service providers to do through FedRAMP authorization in terms of how controls are structured and updated. I think, Bo, the way that you just described that was making sure that policy leads to consistent approach and applicability. But maybe just to pop that up into a category, maybe the impact of policy choices on the implementation concerns shared by agencies, cloud service providers, 3POs could be a category. So I just put policy there, it's under K.
And policy boundaries. That's what
Policy
I
boundaries,
talked
yeah.
about is, authorities, boundaries, scope, applicability, network.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so policy, implementation, implications, boundaries, scope. And then, so Bo brought up the FIPS issue that's also come up a lot over the last 6 months. I wonder if we want to have a category here that's like issues related to specific controls that we know are problematic or complicated or expensive in specific ways. Like if we want to hold space for talking about controls that are having an implication that the FedRAMP team should be aware of. So that's my attempt to summarize the 1,000 great ideas that you guys have just brought up here. And now we have a list that's too long. So, go ahead.
Isn't J related to, D? Could those be merged?
Sure, yeah, D could go under J.
G. And
Yeah, E is related to G, sure.
And C could be removed. That's the one that's duplicative of what's already on the roadmap.
Right, thanks. Which is great. Great to hear.
is there anything we want to potentially think about as a committee on speaking broader with other committees or other agencies in terms of like aligning on controls or like pass that word? We're thinking about reciprocity.
Committee reciprocity.
Yeah, like, is there anything, well, is there any, like, are there any connective tissues we should be building potentially other, like, maybe similar to this?
I don't know. What do you think, Jackie, Bronco, Natural?
Or is it-
Are there other?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think the parties are, got it.
So it
like,
depends on what you want to do.
yeah, well, I'm thinking like, things like state rep, things like CMMC, like, you know, like areas a little bit broader, maybe that where, as CSPs, we get input from all of these different places. Like, is there a way that we could potentially aggregate?
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
that's a great idea.
The difficulty is, as the board, we are not the owner of the construct. So, you know, as somebody who does a lot of these mappings exhaustively and exhaustingly, they're great if you are, you know, FedRAMP owns one side of it, so at least it'll be a one-side map. It's best then if they get the authorized owner of the other construct, and then there can be a bilateral agreement on the mapping, if that's even possible.
Is that like we could ask GSA to ask?
Right, that this would be more of a discussion recommendation to say, you know, FedRAMP get the CSA and come up with a bilateral agreement, or whatever. You'll never get it with ISIC, but there's others who might.
Maybe the limited cost reductions, that's just a simple little board like that.
Or reciprocity, although I guess we did take that off the list.
But then isn't it something that's already in the memo and GSA's roadmap?
And we've just had in the last 2 weeks, two congressional hearings at the HASC, where reciprocity and ATO were discussed. And one of them specifically referenced the 12 authorizations from the JAB. And they use that in terms of, you know, they can only do 12 a year but it was referencing ATOs and my boss asked me, you know, Jackie, what is that? Can you only do 12 ATOs a year? I said, that's what FedRAMP's limit is of what they take in from the JAB authorization perspective. Oh, it's not regular ATOs, no, it's not, but reciprocity was huge and all of the conversations at the HASC. And so, you know, when you look at it from a FedRAMP perspective, not even looking at other frameworks, is how do I partner with GSA? It's again, part of what the OMB memo is, you know, can somebody take an HHS authorization and I use it in the department, or do I have to retest? And, you know, what are my requirements? What are somebody else's requirements? How do we look at this? And are we all looking across the same standards? And so some of this goes back to the knowledge base and the 3 PAOs and making sure that we are all looking at this from the same lens. But just to give you a perspective, if you haven't seen some of the HASC testimony over the last couple of weeks, this has been the topic of conversation. So, you know, we don't even reciprocate among the FedRAMP program. And we're talking about how do we incorporate CMMC. So we really need to start in our own backyard and figuring out how we can leverage other test results.
Is that as much a business risk acceptance from the agencies as security?
That's what I was gonna say, like, feel like getting agency buy-in to what is happening across the government, so to speak, in the existing program, like.
So would that be an area we want to strategize on and potentially form?
And specifically, I wonder if there's like a pilot of reciprocity that we might want to construct like a universe around, like, is it just SaaS providers? Is it just FedRAMP low or just FedRAMP medium? Are there specific types of tools like collaboration tools that would be a good example for a pilot because of the impact and ability to control risk? This group together could potentially define a pilot that would be a pretty meaningful example of like, if we can get this to work and we can generalize from it.
DOD is undertaking a pilot with FedRAMP. You saw that on the roadmap. And that is to shorten the time from authorization to marketplace. You know, so examining what we do and how we would set up a checklist or whatever to say, we're following the standards to authorization. And so when you issue something, we can put it to marketplace without, 6 months, or whatever. And I think that, today, the JAB and DOD, and I don't know about other agencies, but we issue a provisional authorization, which is really looking only at the cloud provider. Agency ATOs also look at the implementation and look at their own system. So there's a lot of controls in there that actually belong to a system as opposed to just what belongs. And so it is hard to reciprocate some agency packages because they issue an ATO inclusive of their system implementation. And so it's hard to peel that layer apart from a reciprocity perspective. And so, if we wanted to gain some synergy, it would be, I think, of how we do agency authorizations and can we separate out 3 PAO results and the cloud infrastructure from the system or the mission layer that's been added to it.
That's really interesting. I mean, do you think it would be possible for the agencies to do that, to have more modular ATOs instead of ATOing a monolith of everything from the cloud service provider to the implementation?
That's what we've attempted to do in the department, so that, and then that's the same principle as the JAB, which is you issue the authorization for the cloud infrastructure and the SaaS. And again, I think, again, those need to be pulled apart even further now so that an agency authorizing official that builds a mission system or uses a SaaS can actually understand risk from that, not necessarily the cloud infrastructure, which needs to be considered by FedRAMP. Oh gosh, I lost my thought. But it is modular. And so we will have, 30 department activities inheriting from a single package. And all they have to do is that last mile controls that are in the responsibility matrix.
Just to echo onto Jackie's point, this speaks to a fundamental problem in terms or misunderstanding of how to facilitate FedRAMP. Because every time we facilitate a FedRAMP authorization, there's 2 authorizations. One corresponding to the underlying platform or infrastructure or SaaS itself that is focused around everything that the vendor has to do with a corresponding set of responsibilities that tenants have to do. And then the secondary authorization is our tenant ATO, right? So to the extent that you have organizations that are issuing a singular authorization for everything, it just simply shows a fundamental misunderstanding of this bifurcated responsibility model because they're just mixing it up.
Well, it really limits. Yeah, well, it does. It's a guidance issue, but it really does limit the use of the information.
And I'll add from the 3PO perspective, we have no idea that actually happens. Like, that's not something that we're involved in like the 2 layers of ATO. And so it's like, well, what could we do in the program and from our documentation perspective to facilitate that better? I like this idea. I think it's something that we could potentially take on to build, but I don't know if it's within our purview, but.
We get to decide if it's in our.
Yeah,
purview.
fair enough.
I think we've added reciprocity and then taken it off in this discussion.
But I don't think it's reciprocity.
Okay.
Like, I think that's the wrong term.
Okay.
Like modularizing? I don't know.
Modular risk is acceptance or?
I don't know. What do you all call it, Jackie? Or-
Training and education.
Falls into the guidance, but.
Yeah.
I come at this with the least background in all of this, and that's, I think, why I'm asking the question, but is that something that would require? So guidance is one thing, but I don't know the legislation being the right rule, but is the way it's set up currently fundamentally not set up for that? Like, you can put out all the guidance you want, but if you want someone to do a modular ATO, which I understood to be like you would do an ATO for other parts of the tech stack, then agencies could look at the part of it they want, not the rest of it, right? Is there anything currently that provides any kind of roadmap for that, or are we just, not to suggest that's not something we should take on, but just understanding the limitations of we're an advisory committee, is that something that if we were to put some thought to it could happen without there being additional policy regulations, somewhere like that?
I have many thoughts. I think it's a solid thing. I think most of us just have upload a giant SSP PDF into Archer and call it a day. Just being brutally honest here.
Yeah.
But to the last half of your point, and I don't want to lose the thread of what do we do as a committee and how do we prioritize? And I think that we have a lot of things here that are covered. And I do want to give full kudos to the FedRAMP team, who is amazing, by the way, and my favorite government program. Thank you, thank you. I don't say that lightly for those of you who know I'm a governor. And they are very smart people and they have very great staff that are going to be working on many of the things that we are discussing here. So if I can put a plea to the committee, we should focus on the areas where we think that this group of unique individuals has a distinctive advantage and viewpoint that the FedRAMP team, we think that they wouldn't be able to figure out on their own for whatever reason. You're all brilliant people, but we have a lot of nerds at the table here who might have different opinions that could bring things in. So I would recommend that we look for those differentiation points between what we can do as a group together versus what we think the FedRAMP team, we can just give them a memo and say, hey, have you all thought about this? You have? Okay, we're good. And call it that.
Good point. All right, what's the, of this list, is anything rising to the top as the best use of our shared perspective over the next year?
I'm gonna look for one, I just want to clarify one thing, the top
Or
priority.
two things. I'm just trying to use a forcing function to see if that.
Just, sorry, compliance,
Three things?
contracting guys.
Small
wants to know
number
what
of
the rules
things.
Actually, make the font a little bigger.
Or can we just maybe go full screen for a moment?
So much better.
Bold laid out.
It's the dark mode.
That's what it says.
You know, something we've also talked about, which I think should be a footnote on every slide that we have is, you know, and the board should continuously advocate for resources and funding for the program in order to achieve any of this going forward. I mean, we all the specs here know how tight times are. And I would be remiss to ask anybody to do anything more. Otherwise, we should look at how FedRAMP could do less with less and focus on what the core capacities are going to be.
It's easier to ask for more budget if you have a strategic
Have a
plan,
list of
things
things to
you
ask
want to do
against
about it. So I
us.
think our time can be focused towards things we'd like to do, but also yes to including budget support.
And I think, and you know this for ourselves at GSA, I mean, we do a lot of sponsorships at GSA, particularly for ourselves, you know, between 2030 to date. And the challenge is that, you know, each of those sponsorships has a related cost association where we go to the business line and ask them to go through and fund the work to facilitate the sponsorship. So like when we're talking about resource advocacy, I think it's important to talk about resources for the corresponding sets of sponsoring agencies, such that we're not nickel and diming our individual programs across the agency, because they're going to be focused around the point that a friend from Bluescape mentioned, you know, $5,000 license agreement. And then I go to the business line, and I'm asking them for $60,000 to facilitate a sponsorship action. All of a sudden, that $5,000 investment is now a $65,000 investment. So it starts to become more of a challenge.
Yeah. And also, what small number of things would you choose from this list that we will come up with comprehensive supportive budget arguments for?
Probably need more time to digest.
It's hard to pick one, yeah.
That's also okay.
I mean, if we do not have to agree on our next priorities today, we can pause and if you have a requirement for more information of any of these topics, we can have some more presentations in a future meeting. Or you know, gather any information that you need to come to your conclusion. But we do have a vote scheduled for today, so would a member of the committee make a motion to delay the selection of the committee's next priorities until we have either identified some additional presentations or information that we would want?
Can I actually make a suggestion? I think last time we did the voting in a spreadsheet, that seems to be interesting. Yeah, that seems pretty effective to get it up to a quick, at least to see if we're aligned or not.
Okay, yeah, we can definitely do that.
Okay.
But we need a motion to delay.
We have to have
I
a motion to delay.
delay.
All right, thank you, Roger.
Accept.
Oh, fantastic. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and do a roll call just to make sure that we can close this out. And how do you vote?
Support.
Daniel, how do you vote?
Support.
Michael?
Support.
John?
Support.
Marcy? Support. Bronco?
Support.
Matt?
Support.
Bo?
Support.
Lamont?
Support.
Nauman?
Support.
Jackie? Support. Bill?
Aye.
And Joshua?
Support.
Great, great. Well, thank you all. The FSCAC staff will get to work on, gathering some additional background, for our next, meeting, to help you, come to a conclusion on which of these areas would be, more beneficial for the use of the FSCAC time. Our next steps, will be to develop an agenda items to set up. And with that, we have our closing remarks. All right. Anne, would you like to, go ahead and, start with them?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. If possible, I have some points here, but I just wanted to say, this is a great discussion. I just wanted to appreciate how well we've represented agencies, cloud service providers, small businesses, 3POs, and had a really rich, rigorous discussion. The fact that we, again, have a list that's too long and we need to get more information on shows just how at the table and engaged everyone is here. So I just wanted to thank you all for the great discussion. I'm looking forward to future meetings.
That was great. Well, thank you all for joining. With that, I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Thank you.
Future in-person meetings.
Yeah, what is the next meeting?
We do not have one scheduled